All right, and we are live, gang. Welcome to our Sunday afternoon live stream, Cosmocast here today. We got a pretty good show, as always. Wouldn't, put together a substandard show for today. And we're going to be continuing last week's investigation into the dystopian new tech right that is currently running our country. Going to be looking a little more in the Yarvin. Going to be looking into Mark Andreessen, who is very underrated, I think, as a key player in this world. We're going to be having Eric from Cosmonaut. He's been on Cosmopod quite a few times, especially related to Middle East topics, to come on and talk to us about Yemen. We're going to talk about the current U.S. war on Yemen that's happening right now, which there's been a lot of talk about the leaks that have happened, but there's obviously a lot more to say about it. There's a lot of history about Yemen that gives context to what's going on, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the new Abundance book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, because this seems to be a very hot topic of conversation. I decided to read some of it, and so we're going to discuss it. So how's everyone doing today?
First off, Donald, I applaud you. I commend you on your bravery. I think I would just start reading it and just throw the book at the wall eventually. I'd be like, nah, I'm good.
I was reading it on EPUB, so I don't want to have to spend money on it.
Well, that's
so I guess I could have deleted the digital file in rage. But honestly, reading some of the Curtis Yarvin stuff I was reading, it comes off as a rational breath of fresh air compared to how I'm handling stuff. Yeah, I don't want to understate the similarities actually between these things.
Yeah, I mean there is definitely links, but gargling Drano is better.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not very hard to beat that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to.
You guys don't like drones? You don't like a future with drones?
Yeah. Oh wait. Yeah. No, we'll have to read can you when we talk about Abundance, you have to read. That's one thing I did read. Was the futuristic vision at the beginning.
Oh yeah. It starts out with the YIMBY liberal utopian vision of
pretty fucking hilarious.
Having drones deliver your Whole Foods curry or whatever.
It's like Amazon but with drones.
I feel like they've been barking up that tree for a while.
Yeah, they have. But so I was thinking maybe I could try to summarize the part 1 that we went over last week about the tech right. Then we can get
that's a good start.
Yeah, so last week we kind of talked about the ideological roots of the tech right that is a dominant force behind the Trump administration. And the article that we used basically it kind of starts off with Elon Musk and the little known historical family history of Elon Musk, where it's his maternal grandfather was a member of what is called the technocracy movement in the US. And the technocracy movement was a futurist and kind of utopian middle-class political movement that wanted to replace the anarchy of the price system and of capital with a sort of corporation of engineers and scientists that would run a global government that itself broke up into continental pieces. And they dovetailed kind of with the eugenics movement, the progressive movement of the 20s. And even though they had a very totalizing vision, in a way they were totalitarian, whatever that means, they were more or less anti-capitalist. And in that sense, there was some progressive content to their program. Of course, they also had a reactionary leaning in that they were extremely anti-democratic and wanted to implement an aristocracy. The aristocracy here, the best being the engineers and the scientists, and everyone else is an idiotic piece of the rabble, right? And the idiotic rabble should submit to the expertise of the technocrats and let the technocrats make all of the major decisions. So that's sort of the family lineage, ideological lineage of Musk. Of course, it mutates with Musk because the progressive content is absolutely gone. There's no desire to eliminate the price system or capital or to create a more egalitarian society. But anyways, then the article goes on to talk about what is called the neo-reactionary movement, which came up with a concept of the Dark Enlightenment, which we like to call the Dork Enlightenment. And the Dork Enlightenment is, the way I like to think of it, is it's just another iteration of what Domenico de Sordo calls a radical aristocratic vision of the world. And it also comes out of accelerationism. The concept is this: we need to do whatever to remove the fetters to technological development. And we need to do so in order to establish what they see as kind of the modern Italian city-state, like kind of like a modern Venice. And these modern Venices are run by CEOs, by a board, and the citizens are nothing but consumers or customers, right? Of this government. And I guess what you could say about this I'm not doing a very good job. Someone should add to what I'm saying. But one of the things that's very important about this Dark Enlightenment is not only are they technological determinists and obsessed with technocracy, but they're extremely anti-democratic and see the masses as nothing but just dysgenic material that either needs to be led or straight up eliminated. There's a deep genocidal.
Yeah, no, we'll get. I actually want to go into some Curtis or Moldbug, as he was writing at this point, where he actually talks about his humane alternative to genocide.
Yeah. So the avatars of this movement are, the first being Nick Land, who's a total freak.
Yeah, and Nick Land is interesting because he comes from a kind of Deleuzian, almost like kind of left wing,
Well, left-wing accelerationism.
Yeah, exactly. He comes from like this kind of like left-wing academic Deleuzian background,
and the left accelerationists coming out of an institute, some cybernetic institute at the University of Warwick, their basic premise is the following. It starts with revolutionary pessimism in the sense that there is no human agent that can destroy capital, right, and replace it with an alternative. Capital itself exhibits creative destruction. It destroys itself. And there's nothing external to capitalism that will destroy it. So we have to kind of bow at the altar of capital and allow it to do its work. So we have to kind of remove any fetters in opposing capital in its own development. And from there, you can see it's very obvious, or it's very easy to jump from that to, well, capital is great.
Right.
And that's what Nick Land does.
Yeah, because Nick Land's whole thing is, I mean, this is kind of true to a certain extent, is like capital itself is AI. Basically, it's like he kind of sees capital as artificial intelligence, in the sense that, well, capital does in a way kind of act behind the backs of its producers and acts, back upon capitalists and workers in ways that they can't control, right? So there is like, in the sense that there is like a kind of irrationality, anarchy of the market, but through the kind of aggregates of all of these different capitals acting, you have the total force of capital acts back on us in unpredictable ways. So Nick Land kind of sees this itself as like an artificial intelligence,
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, which is interesting. And this is kind of an idea he comes up with in his more left-wing phase, but he takes it further and further. And so you get this post-humanist idea where humanity is nothing special. It's just, he kind of takes up this flat ontology where humans are not anything. There's no real such thing as like a subject or subjectivity. Humans are just, meat like anything else. And if something more intelligent than humanity is to replace humanity, then we should support this. Actually, this is good. So let's say that if the capitalist AI was to form some kind of Skynet, where humans were essentially just turned into the slaves of allowing this superior AI that's more intelligent than humanity in order to prosper. That would be good, because the idea is a greater intelligence is being produced, and that's that's more important than any kind of human flourishing or human development, because this is more intelligent than humans. Who cares about humans? We've created something superior. We've created the AI, the post-human AI, basically.
So basically, these lunatics are the intellectual avatars, or they lay the ideological groundwork for a lot of the tech right? And as you can see, the strains of this ideology are not only anti-democratic, but anti-humanist in the literal sense that they hate humanity. They hate
Yeah.
they hate the vast majority of humanity. So anyways, that's the ideology in broad strokes. There's a lot that I mean, the ideology is threadbare, incoherent, and it's bullshit. But there is a lot to read about it. They do have a lot of shitty ideas that you'd have to get into. It's not super important. But now we'd like to talk about kind of like the ideology in action. So you
Right.
had these kind of prophets that came up, and now let's look at their followers and see what they're doing today. That's kind of the topic we're getting onto right now.
Yeah. So, Mark Andreessen, I think, is a really interesting guy because he doesn't have as much clout as Elon does. Obviously, he's not up there with the chainsaw. He's not heading Doge and stuff, but he does have actual power in the Trump administration.
Who is Andreessen, Donald? Just for
okay, so Andreessen is part of this VC firm, Andreessen Horowitz, major investor in Facebook, what's now X or Twitter, big crypto investor. Andreessen Horowitz is he's also got investments in all these different like defense AI firms, drone firms, stuff like that. He comes out in support of Trump after the assassination attempt on Trump. But before all of that happens, he's kind of making a name for himself with this like techno-optimist ideology. Like he has this techno-optimist manifesto, which is incredibly cringe. I think we talked a little bit about it last session.
It might be worth reading a few passages and then maybe showing the video of this cretin talking.
Yeah, let me hold on. Let me bring up the actual. But yeah, I don't know what this Andreessen guy has actually done to like merit like having any kind of public profile.
Listen,
other than like having money and like throwing it at people.
It's like a question for a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly.
The question we all have.
Yeah, I mean,
one guy just headed the fuck out, like zooted his
again, like these aren't people that with any technical background or skills.
Yeah,
I know Andreessen is not an engineer or technician in any way.
But anyway, he wrote this techno-optimist manifesto, which really does kind of sum up this kind of modern technocratic mentality that we're dealing with here. Let me bring this up. Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is the Andreessen Horowitz website. Yeah, so we got the Thomas Edison quote, some really deep stuff there. The lies we're being told, and we basically we're told that technology is bad, that it's hurting our wages, taking our jobs, hurting the environment, blah blah blah, and we should be pessimistic. And
who the hell says that?
Ted Kaczynski and people like us who don't think that Mark Andreessen having complete control over society and introducing whatever technology he wants according to whatever whim he wants, people like us who want to slow down.
Yeah, like the baby murdering AI software is so great for everyone.
Yeah, you don't want us to have the baby murdering AI software.
It's us tools with morals and ethical concerns.
You guys are just this is just this anti-technocrat stuff is just Pizzagate for leftists. Technology is good. But anyway, so yeah, and it's just technology is good. Don't have any kind of theory of technology. Don't think about technology.
Yeah, that's the thing that drives me crazy about all this is this reification of technology as if it were like it's a product of social labor also, right? And the question is not just what is the object, but in what relations does this object enter into?
Right.
I mean, there are evidently some technologies developed that have no potential for the betterment of human life. I'm sorry, the very physical character of nuclear armament dictates that it cannot be good for human life.
Well,
But
yeah,
there are many other objects or processes or systems, like for instance, AI, that could be put to good use, right? But they are not. And why is that? Because of the relations of production that dictate how they are actually used. But of course, they can't think in these terms because they just technology good. It's just baby brained.
yeah. Well, the way I kind of thought about it was technology has like a telos to it. It's created with a purpose. Like they're the raw components to a technology, but without some kind of like human telos that's giving them a purpose, it doesn't become a technology. Like
But
fire is just fire, but when it's until it's like put to human purpose in some way, it doesn't become a technology. So
Of course, but there's also the physical constraints, and those physical constraints will dictate possible teloses.
right,
Which
right,
one is chosen is a question of history, more or less human agency, right? Social agency. But
right.
like, you can't turn a nuclear bomb into a means of feeding people. Like you can, I mean, maybe someone could come up with like a convoluted case, but they would be precisely doing just that, right? I mean, like I've heard some people be like, as a counter example to what I'm saying, they're like, oh, they could like apparently you can mine with nuclear bombs. I'm like,
I don't think that's
that
a good
sounds
idea.
horrific.
yeah, let's
That
not
sounds
do
like a
that.
terrible idea.
Yeah, let's not do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, techno-optimists believe that societies like sharks grow or die. Growth is progress, leading to expansion of life, increasing knowledge, higher well-being.
This literally reads like VC bullshit, just like that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's just so yeah, we have technology is good because it creates productivity growth, and that's good because growth is good, and and markets obviously are the most efficient way of organizing all of this. This is all of the stuff we believe, and they quote Hayek, the knowledge problem. So obviously these guys are very clear about markets are always better. It's always the best way to do anything is markets. We believe in market discipline. The market naturally disciplines. So
Except for these assholes.
yeah. Markets lift people out of poverty. This is just all the same neoliberal stuff that we always believe. We're all supposed to already believe anyway. But
Yeah, intellectually extremely threadbare. Not really much there.
yeah, I mean, I think after how many years of neoliberal dogma, I think it is very silly to believe in this stuff. I think the only people who truly do believe in all of this stuff are people who financially benefit from the current arrangement. But oh yeah, we're against universal basic income. I guess that's interesting because I think a lot of these Silicon Valley guys actually seem to think that universal basic income is kind of like a decent way to kind of
Is he for it? It kind of sounds like he's arguing against it.
Wait, did I? We believe a human basic income would turn people into zoo animals to be farmed by the state. Man was not meant to be farmed. Man was meant to be useful, to be productive, to be proud.
Sounds like he's arguing against it.
My God, this is like Robinson.
It's like it's almost like, yeah, we don't even want to give you basic income.
Right, that's what I'm saying. He's kind of he's arguing against it.
Well, we'll talk more about it with Curtis Yarvin, but there's like some of them are kind of mask off in the sense that like the vast majority of humanity is supernumerary or just pointless, so they should just be eliminated.
Yeah, the thing is like he does think that most of man needs to be farmed. They just want them to be farmed in a way that's productive to him, and he thinks that basic income might get in the way of that. So
the techno-capital machine is a actual term that Nick Land used.
Yeah, no, but he mentioned Nick Land right here in the first sentence. Combine technology and markets, and you get what Nick Land has termed the techno-capital machine, the engine of perpetual material creation, growth, and abundance.
Yeah, because there's no limits to nothing physical. There's no limits to growth. None.
Yeah, exactly.
And the thing that's missing in all this is like politics and democracy and, sort of our social organization.
But you have to hear what he thinks about democracy. So, God, this upward spiral has been running for years, despite continuous howling from communists and Luddites. You know, the Luddites, they were heroes. Everyone likes to shit on the Luddites, but they, you know, they got some important reforms passed for their actions.
Plus, like, I can't think of a single, like, not Western communist who's like, man, fuck science, bro. Like, fuck that shit. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, the USSR was, like, in many ways too technocratic. And there's a joke that the US is run by lawyers, but the USSR was run by engineers.
Right.
You know, I mean, like Khrushchev, for instance, did I think the School of Mines, or did he do? I think I'm thinking of Brezhnev. Actually,
wasn't Khrushchev an agronomist?
That's what I was. Yeah, I think he was, and it was actually Brezhnev who did like School of Mines.
Yeah.
Oh, it's kind of crazy. He's saying that like technology sort of operates under like the law of natural selection. You know, the best ideas kind of win out. I don't know what tech world Andreessen is living in, but it does not seem like, you know, for one example, the Reels, social media Reels format, you know, that's fucking everywhere now. I don't know if I would say that's the best idea. It's maybe the best idea in terms of like taking all of our time in data and things like that. But, you know, best in terms of what, I think is really the question that's kind of unanswered here.
Also,
well, because they try to like, they see like the market as like this natural selection mechanism, right? But the thing is like natural selection like doesn't like have a telos, like it doesn't have a purpose. The whole point of evolution is that like it's a blind process.
Yep.
And so the idea that like if you actually do kind of believe it that markets are this kind of blind natural selection process, well, there's no guarantee that like the best ideas win, because what is like the good in this?
Well, and you know, there's Stephen Jay Gould developed a concept called adaptationism, or he attributed a fallacy to much evolutionary thinking, which is, I guess, for the purposes of here, I can simplify it into 2 points. One, there's a belief that every single feature developed in nature is adaptive. Mm-hmm. And 2, there's a belief that the process of natural selection does not only produce adaptive features, but the optimal adaptive features.
Right.
And what Gould says is that these 2 points are in fact false. One, not every feature is adaptive, right? That's just not how. There are physical constraints, geological, environmental. It's too complex a process. The actual historical process is too complex to simplify natural selection in that way. And secondly, it is impossible to dictate what constitutes an optimal strategy. So for instance, like, you know, zebras are roaming around. Wouldn't and they have to defend themselves from lions. Wouldn't the optimal strategy be to develop machine guns on their back so that they could mow down Simba? Like, that would be optimal in a sense, but that's not how things actually work. And so that's the other thing is that they try to read into the social process of capital as an evolutionary process. And then not only do they try to read into it an evolutionary process, but they admit nothing but biological fallacies into it. So they're just
right.
They don't know anything.
Well, yeah, so they can't actually understand like what is great about like Darwinian evolution is the fact that it's like not teleological and that it doesn't assume that there's like a purpose to evolution.
Anyways, maybe we should show the video of this dipshit.
Yeah, but I do want to say something about this section on intelligence real quick, because it does kind of dovetail with what I was saying about how Nick Land's whole thing, and like this whole idea of that like of post-humanism, where like the idea is if we do create like artificial general intelligence that's superior to humanity, it's more intelligent than humanity, then we should sacrifice humanity for the sake of it. So here we kind of see the VC like pitch version of this. We believe intelligence is the ultimate engine of progress. Intelligence makes everything better, which is why the world is just getting dumber and dumber as your people take over. Smart people and smart societies outperform less smart ones on virtually every metric we can measure. It's however, obviously you're measuring this through like IQ or whatever. So like, all these people are just IQ people.
This is like operating at a very low level.
We believe intelligence is an upward spiral. So there's just more smart people around the world are recruited into the techno-capital machine, and we're forming symbiotic relationships with machines and new cybernetic systems, and artificial intelligence is ramping up our capabilities. So I really do think that artificial intelligence is the key to this kind of idea of going
what the hell even is intelligence? Like in the way in the sense that they're using it.
All right, that's a good point. They don't really define intelligence.
They don't define anything.
But
nothing.
Real quick, I will want to say he has the enemy. This is really what's actually like important here, where he like names like his enemies. He says, "We have enemies. Our enemies are not bad people, but rather bad ideas." And he says, "Our present society has been subjected to a mass demoralization campaign for 6 decades against technology and against life, under varying names like existential risk, sustainability, ESG, sustainable development goals, social responsibility, stakeholder capitalism, precautionary principle, trust and safety, tech ethics, risk management, degrowth, the limits of growth. The demoralization campaign is based on the bad ideas of the past. Zombie ideas, many derived from communism, disasters then and now that have refused to die."
What a wonderful writer. So refreshing.
It reads like it was written by AI.
It was written on meth, bro.
It's just such a coincidence that everything, that's against life itself is everything that they have like a material interest in fighting, which is regulations, extension, all this stuff.
It does bring out my humanist aspect. The Althusserians are gonna, crucify me for that, but
yeah, but I think they mean anti-humanism in a different sense.
Yeah, they do. I know. I'm joking, obviously.
They're not literally like fuck human beings.
Yeah, no, that's a misconception that people have about Althussera is that it's
but it's not history, how you understand history.
Yeah. But so yeah,
I mean, it's kind of crazy that the enemy is like risk and responsibility,
right, ethical concerns and shit like that.
Oh yeah, and it gets even better. Our enemy is George Orwell's 1984, Thomas Sowell's Unconstrained Vision. I'm not as familiar with that one, but I imagine it's the same kind of like right-wing critique of like utopian thinking. Alexander Kozhev's Universal and Homogeneous State, Thomas More's Utopia. Our enemy is a precautionary principle. So yeah, anything that's like limiting how much you can risk our fucking lives in the future. And yeah, of course, they bring in Nietzsche, the last man.
So someone asks, how do developments in AI and automation relate to Marx's references to the general intellect and the fragment on machines? So there's an interesting work, and I'm guessing you're referring to the work by Pasquinelli I think that's his name, in Radical Philosophy, where he talks about, I mean, basically the historiographical point is that Marx retires that concept of the general intellect and replaces it with a notion of the social laborer. I don't really recall the ins and outs of the argument, but I believe it is Pasquinelli. General intellect. Yeah, on the origins of Marx's general intellect. It was written in 2019 by Matteo Pasquinelli. So I recommend people look into that to get a better idea of how Marx treated that concept of the general intellect, which was like a big concept around the time of Marx. So
yeah. So yeah, this is this is deeply reactionary stuff. Like, it's written to kind of not, maybe if you're just like a stupid VC who like doesn't understand any of this shit, you read, oh yeah, man, technology, great, we need to grow, build, all these regulations are getting in our way, but there's a deep animosity to democracy here. And
yeah, and just like humanity, human well-being. I mean, it becomes very apparent, I think, when you actually think about like, what these people are concretely trying to do as kind of manifestations of this kind of techno-optimist vision, basically creating like, new company towns that, are run outside of, the rule of law, where they, there are no regulations, where they can perform, totally unregulated experiments on human subjects, in the name of like,
Yes.
improving, biohacking and, things like that. But also like this investment in, massive like expansion of the surveillance state and, drone technology, data technology.
Yes. And
did we talk
so-
about some of these cities that they're founding up?
Right. So there is Prospera, which is in Honduras. And I was doing a little bit of reading into that. And so basically, I think this was under the Obama administration, actually. Like, we could their kind of left-wing government and put in like this right-wing, like, far, like super right-wing, libertarian, almost like just privatize everything type guy. And Andreessen and Thiel and some of those other people in that circle basically made a deal with the government, that the right-wing government there, that they would basically get to build like a city state there, because they're really into this whole network state, or what Moldbug calls the patchwork, which is the idea of creating an alternative sovereignty outside the existing governments. And the sovereignty is a Sovcor. And so in Honduras, they actually started doing this and building their own like city state there. But I guess the left wing, or like center left, whatever government, got back in power, and they're trying to get rid of these guys. And these guys are now suing the government of Honduras and trying to get Daddy Yankee to, help them out, which I think is like very interesting.
Specifically, I heard that they want to sue them through the World Bank, like
they want to
Court of Settlements or whatever. Yeah, they want to bankrupt the country to attempt to prevent it.
Yeah, and I saw something about like claims of unregulated experiments going on there, but I couldn't find the actual news story. It seemed like it was like taken off the internet when I was trying to. So I was having trouble finding the actual source on that, so I didn't want to say too much on it, because I think there's maybe information on that is a little out in the air. But I mean, it is clear that this whole idea of the patchwork network state. There's this guy Balazs Srinivasan, one of these VC guys who wrote this whole book, The Network State, of the idea that sovereign corporations can essentially replace the existing it's the lines of this. It's lines of flight, as Deleuze calls it. It's the idea of like we're trying to find lines of flight to escape from the cathedral. But there's also the city of Praxis, which is another one of these like city states they're trying to build, which is a Peter Thiel backed thing, and they have connections with the whole Dime Square kind of hipster far right scene.
Yeah, it almost seems like there are like two different like ideas, one of which is kind of like this like utopian, like kind of like live forever, like biohacking kind of like almost Burning Man style, like society, but then also like a more like just standard like company town like type model. Like folks are arguing for Elon Musk to turn in Texas into a one of these sovereign cities.
They're trying to do it in Texas too,
where they have the city, as I'm sort of reading here, the city will have a mayor and 2 commissioners, and the sole candidate for mayor is the SpaceX security manager. So it really does seem like a way that just totally like rule by corporation. And some of this stuff sounds a little crazy, like utopian, like pie in the sky. But I mean, it's worth noting that like this has a lot of the backing within the Trump administration right now. I mean, probably the clearest link is like JD Vance. Like he was a venture capitalist. He has like clear ties to like Peter Thiel, and like they are pushing these ideas of like, special economic zones and things like that. I mean, Greenland, that was in the news, I think yesterday, there have been kind of discussions about taking Greenland from Denmark. And the idea there, I think, is similar, that folks want to turn Greenland into, some place like this for, kind of unethical, medical experimentation, or, at the very least, kind of, anti-democratic approaches to kind of, tech-based
Right.
governance.
I mean,
so it seems utopian, but it is happening.
No, definitely. I think that's the broad argument we're kind of trying to make, is that all these ape shit ideologies, they're being pushed by actual agents today, and they are in some ways like getting it done. And as I said, kind of the political ideal is this sort of like futurist contemporary Italian city state. That's what something like Prospera is.
Right. And the cryptocurrency plays a really big role in this stuff, because it's about creating an entire financial system that isn't tied to any kind of sovereign state, that can be democratically controlled.
Yeah, and as we said, the vision globally is the establishment of these sovcores, like just a bunch of city states run by a corporate monarch.
Right.
That's
So
the
you have
final
the
vision.
city states with and so if you have a financial system that has no kind of democratic public oversight, then there's nothing at all to kind of control these oligarchs and these city states can do.
Yeah. I mean, the question I have is, like, in the era of the nation state, what is the kind of like, feasibility of this kind of like return to a more kind of like, sovereign city state type model? And I think maybe some of the answer there lies in this sort of other idea that the tech right is invested in, this idea of like a new Manhattan project for, investment in, kind of private surveillance, as well as like the sort of the active dismantling of like, our state apparatus that's going on right now, kind of facilitated by the Doge crew. But sort of related to that, like the it's almost like a smash and grab of data, of private data, social security data, and so on, where it does seem like it is part of this attempt to like funnel, public functions, public information, public contracts, like to these kinds of corporations. But that's sort of a broad question I have for us. Like, how feasible is kind of a city-state model in the age of the nation state, and what would it kind of look like for us to get there?
I feel like I just had the sudden realization that, leaving aside whether the nation state is the only way I think the capitalists have found to rule. Leaving that aside for a second, I just had the sudden realization that technologically they have all of the constituent parts that they would need. It would seem that like cryptocurrency, for example, was the last big piece, because you could have I guess a flight of fancy about establishing your own sovereignty, but escaping the dollar system was always going to be an issue. I think cryptocurrency would be the last piece of that puzzle. Like, it conceivably one of the ways in which they could extricate themselves from the sovereignty of like the U.S. Financial system.
Like in conspiracy theories, there's this idea of like the breakaway civilization, that like the elite is like secretly preparing like its own breakaway civilization that they're going to like use to separate when the apocalypse happens. Which, I mean, I do think that the rich people probably are like creating bunkers and stuff and like preparing like their like preparing for whatever apocalyptic scenarios they may be worried about. Like, that is like a thing that's like happening, I'd imagine. But it does remind me of that kind of idea as well. But I think the way that these people kind of look at existing states is, because to them, the best kind of state is a state that acts like a business, where you don't have citizens but customers. And so to them, existing states are just businesses that don't function at what they're supposed to do. And so they're kind of like, think about how like a venture capitalist looks at like a firm they're trying to like take over and do like a hostile takeover of, right? So I think they kind of see like existing states as like firms that they're like, that they can loot for like treasury in order to build up their own kind of project.
But
Because they really do think that private entities will be able to do everything government does more efficiently. So as they build up their network state, eventually, like, it will basically just replace the existing states because they'll loot them more and more to build them, and their network state will be more and more efficient. And
yeah, I mean, it's so two things. Carlos is very much right. They see cryptocurrency as a means of escaping the political sovereignty of the US state, but also the quote unquote economic sovereignty of the US central bank, right? And the Bretton Woods system. Everything financially internationally runs on dollars. So I think they see the cryptocurrency as a means of getting away from that. Of course, the problem is that cryptocurrency only gets its meaning in this financial system.
yeah,
The second thing, why this whole idea of Sovcores is utopian in the sense that Marx meant it, which is that this whole idea of Sovcore is posited purely in their brains in a way that runs counter to actual historical development. Capitalist production today is irreversibly international in scope. Irreversibly. We are not going back from that. Now, secondly, Marx got a lot of things wrong. One of the things he got absolutely right is that under capitalism, production, distribution, consumption they centralize and they concentrate. They centralize physically in some ways. I mean, there's also things that work against that. But more importantly, they concentrate in terms of ownership. So despite the fact that these dipshits posit this ideal of having a bunch of small city states, the tendency for production is that things glom together, right? So what prevents the process, the opposite process from happening? They're going to try to break it up into patchworks. What happens from the opposite process of one firm, if the state is a firm, comes to concentrate more and more and takes over the other firms? And then what do you have? You don't have a patchwork. So the whole thing is pure nonsense in the sense it is utopian, in the sense that it goes against the very tendencies of capital, right? And so it's just, as I said, it's completely bunk. What prevents the patchwork from becoming a Leviathan again, right? It's just there's no thought, really. I'm sorry.
I mean, in that sense, it's kind of similar to Nazism, and then like Nazism, it did kind of there was this kind of utopian ideal within Nazism that went against the counter to the development of capitalism, and that they wanted to give every great Aryan farmer their own land and all the territories that they were seizing, and kind of they wanted to end the proletariat without ending
yeah, they wanted to
capitalism,
return to
essentially.
some kind of like idyllic parochial production on small farms where you have like Heidi of the Alps fucking growing beets or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
across the
and
world.
obviously, what these people are putting forward is different in a lot of ways, or similarities, especially with the race science. But regardless, I think when capitalists, in power, can unite with nationalist movements and get taken up by utopian ideologies, and they can do a lot of damage in the process of doing this. They can do a lot of damage in the process of trying to enact these visions. And I think the way this patchwork stuff is going to play out in the future, I think it's going to be what we're seeing is around the world is a lot of ethnic balkanization and warfare along those lines. And I can kind of see the patchwork stuff playing into that, and I can see these VCs kind of using the kind of collapse of societies and the balkanizations that arise out of them in order to take advantage of them and to. But it's not going to actually. We're not actually going to replace like nation states. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's worth getting into. So, these guys are extremely anti-democratic. So how does this kind of align with the quote unquote populism of a Trump? Well, there's a book called the Sorcerer or the Apprentice and the Sorcerer, or maybe it's the basically
the Ishe Lando one.
Yeah. And basically one of the theses is that fascism becomes, and it's actually not that original because Trotsky said something similar, but it's an arm for the bourgeoisie to fight back against the democratic aspirations of the masses so as to impose the rule of capital, the uncontested rule of capital. And that's exactly, and in that sense, that's exactly the relationship that these tech right fuckers have. They're opportunistic. They see the Trump administration as like this Trojan horse to just start like pillaging the state, right? And like they don't give a shit about the hogs that voted for Trump. In fact, they think they're dysgenic material. But they see the Trump administration as like a very good opportunity to just fuck shit up and pillage the state, right? I think are you muted?
Yeah, I was muted.
Yeah.
I said Andreessen is the clearest about that. And I'm actually going to put on a clip by
The Apprentice to
Andreessen.
Sorcerer. Yeah, that's the name of the book.
Because Andreessen, like, he's very clear that, like, he's getting on board with MAGA because he sees it as a tool for his class interests, and he makes no bones about it. And he does really, like, believe in a lot of this neo-reactionary ideology. Like, hold on, there's an interview of him on Lex Friedman, which is just, it's just ridiculous. Let me bring this up. Okay, yeah.
All of humanity, like it's the person who cares the most about everybody. And with Elon, you have a guy who literally, like, he's literally, he talks about this constantly, and he talks about exactly the same in private. He's literally, he is operating on behalf of all of humanity to try to get us to, he goes through to get us through multiplanetary civilization so that we can survive a strike on any one planet, so that we can extend the light of human consciousness into the world and, into the universe and have it persist. And the good of the whole thing. And like literally the critique is, yeah, we want you to care about all of humanity, but not like that.
Yeah, all the critics, all the surface turmoil of the critics will be forgotten.
I think
they will
that's
not.
fair.
You said that
so confident
we
that
always
they're
end up
gonna rule the
being
world.
ruled by the elites of some kind. Can you explain this law, this idea?
So this comes from a Italian political philosopher from about 100 years ago named Robert. I'm going to let you pronounce the Italian, Michel's. Or Michael's, and then I learned about it through a famous book on politics, probably the best book on politics written in the 20th century, called The Machiavellians.
And this book, The Machiavellians by James Burnham. James Burnham was a former Trotskyist who became like a neocon, and he wrote a lot about the new class, what's basically called the PMC. But he had this whole idea that like American capitalism and then Soviet communism were basically like actually kind of converging into like this new system where the middle class of like the middle management and professionals are becoming like the new ruling class. But this book, The Machiavellians, is actually the book that Curtis Yarvin tells everyone to read. So I have no doubt that he read this book because Curtis Yarvin told him to.
Well, this guy James Burnham.
Apparently someone in our chat says that not an awful book, to be honest. Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe it's worth looking at.
Oh, no. I think I actually have been meaning to read it because I think it probably is a good introduction to these like elite theorists, these Italian thinkers like Mosca and Michel's and all of them.
A big one is also Gustave Le Bon, who wrote Mass Psychology of the Masses.
Yeah, Le Bon. Yeah, so... And that's really like, Yarvin, we can like joke about him all we want, but like he does like have like a backing in a tradition of reactionary thought that goes back to like Carlyle and de Maistre, and more so Carlyle. But yeah, he's into these elite theorists. And I've actually been meaning to read more of this stuff myself. But anyway.
It's had a big impact on me. But in the Machiavelli.
Wait, what are you going to say?
I was going to say, I don't want to just say nonsense. The book that I'm thinking of is The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind.
Right. Yeah, that was a big influence on Mussolini too, actually.
Yeah. Actually, it's huge.
He resurrects what he calls the sort of Italian realist school of political philosophy from the 10s and 20s. And these were people, to be clear, this was not like a Mussolini thing. These were people who were trying to understand the actual mechanics of how politics actually works. So to get to the actual sort of mechanical substance of like how the political machine operates. And this guy, Michel, had this concept he ended up with called the iron law of oligarchy. And so what the iron law of oligarchy, and I mean, take a step back to say what he meant by oligarchy, because it has multiple meanings. So basically in classic political theory, there's basically three forms of government at core. There's democracy, which is rule of the many. There's oligarchy, which is rule of the few. And there's monarchy, which is rule of the one. And you can just use that as a general framework of any government you're going to be under is going to be one of those. Just a mechanical observation without even saying which one's good or bad, just a structural observation. And so the question that Michelle's asked was like, is there such a thing as democracy? Like, is there actually such a thing as democracy? Is there ever actually like direct government? And what he did was he mounted this sort of incredible historical exploration of whether democracies had ever existed in the world. And the answer basically is almost never. And we could talk about that. But the other thing he did was he sought out the most democratic private organization in the world that he could find at that point, which he concluded was some basically communist German auto workers union that was like wholly devoted to the workers of the world uniting, back when that was like the hot thing.
Funny, he's talking about the book Political Parties is written about the Social Democratic Party of Germany, which was at the point he wrote that a mass party which had its own bureaucracy and I think there is from Michelle's he kind of comes from a syndicalist background, so I think for him like democracy has to be like the most pure direct democracy basically. He doesn't really I think there's a lot to say about Robert Michelle's and how you actually respond to his arguments, but it's interesting to me that these kind of arguments are coming.
And he went in there and he's like, okay, this is the organization out of all organizations on planet Earth that must be operating as a direct democracy. And he went in there and he's like, oh, nope, there's a leadership class.
What are we going to say, Jean-Mil?
I mean, so like two things. One, the opposite actually is also the case, which is that in any oligarchy or any aristocracy, the oligarchy and the aristocracy do not in any way respond to the needs of the masses. Their regime will not last. So it goes the other way too, right? That's the thing. Secondly, I can posit all kinds of iron laws in history. It's just a completely empty set of words. What you need to do is go into the specifics of every era, right? There's an iron law that human beings breathe air. There's an iron law that human beings eat food. There's an iron law that human beings dance. Like, it's just like I can posit all kinds of fucking iron laws, right? It's like actually you have to go into the minutia of the era. It's just cheap, right? So yeah, in other words, you can go both ways. Like
right.
It's not purely insulated, and if it is, it's fucked, right? And second, iron law my ass. I can pull out iron laws from my ass on any topic.
Yeah, and it's funny it's called the iron law of oligarchy because like you can say like you can even say, well, it's always goes that way, but it is not an iron law by definition because it is a social tendency,
It's really hard to discern nomological features in social life, like in general.
Yeah, as Wittgenstein said, the what is it? The laws of history are a closed book or something. It's difficult to fucking come up with regularities in general, right?
Yeah.
But, if it were that easy, then we could just do a physics of society, and that's.
I mean, all social science would be reducible to physics ultimately.
Well, that's kind of what a lot of the Italian realists kind of act like, is they kind of see politics as like an engineering thing that you can reduce to physics, basically.
Yeah, the tech people too.
Oh, there's like 6 guys at the top.
Yeah, over 6 guys at the top that control everything. Oh, there's an elected leadership. Oh my god.
Control everything. And they lead the rest of the membership along, by the nose, which is, of course, the story of every union. The story of every union is always the story of, there's a Jimmy Hoffa in there, kind of running the thing. We just saw that with the dock workers union, right? Like, there's a guy and he's in charge. And by the way, the number 2 is his son, right? Like, that's not like an accident, right? So the iron law of oligarchy basically says democracy is fake. There's always a ruling class. There's always a ruling elite structurally. And he said the reason for that is because the masses can't organize, right? What's the fundamental problem? Whether the mass is 25,000 people in a union or 250 million people in a country, the masses can't organize. The majority cannot organize. Only a minority can organize. And to be effective in politics, you must organize. And therefore, every political structure in human history has been some form of a small organized elite ruling a large and dispersed majority. Every single one. The Greeks and the Florentines had brief experiments in direct democracy, and they were total disasters. In Florence, I forget the name of it. It was called like the Workers' Revolt or something like that. There was like a 2-year period where they basically experimented with direct democracy during the Renaissance, and it was a complete disaster. And they never.
Yeah, he's talking about the Ciompi revolt, I think, in 1381, I believe. That's what he's talking about. But yeah, so right there for the, I mean, listen, we know from history that that's just not true, that the majority can't organize. Like there is something to say that like minorities play a role, an important role in the organization of majorities. There's something to say about the interrelation between the two. But I think, obviously the kind of blatant simplification that he's putting forward here is
Also, the other thing is like, okay, so one, he's conflating history with the history of class society, right? Those are not the same thing. There is a qualitative break in human history, and this is a scientific distinction, right, between class society and pre-class societies. Secondly, positing that there's one thing called being a minority in leadership, being in leadership, is profoundly unhelpful, because there are forms of leadership where the relations of accountability are just not the same, right? If I'm like the dictator of Rome, I don't have the same relation to the citizens or to the people in the society as, say, if I'm an emperor in the Incan empire. It's just not the same. It's profoundly unhelpful to just level these distinctions, right? Of course, there's going to be leadership, but then the basic question is, what is the level and kind of accountability that that leadership has towards,
right,
and that differs wildly based on the society,
Yeah, it's like he's like defining democracy as like there's no such thing as leadership and there's no leadership making decisions. But it's like, well, really, when we talk about democracy, it's about being able to choose our leaders and hold them to account. It's not that there's no leaders at all. I mean,
I mean, basically for him, like democracy is just like you just pillage everything that's not like glued to the ground. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like the zoo.
It sounds kind of like, like direct democracy is like, like anarchist consensus style politics.
He literally seems to argue that if there's any trace of leadership, it's no longer a democracy, which would make democracy functionally impossible.
Yeah, for real. Like, so
that's his point. That's his point, right? That democracy, it's impossible, and so why even bother? Let me and my friends make the decisions because we're the intelligent ones and we have AI. And
you better work on that pitch a bit. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, this is, it's funny that he's saying this all out loud on Lex Friedman, which is a pretty popular podcast. It's like the rightists are supposed to have their esoteric message and their exoteric message. You have your exoteric message, which is like, yeah, join the MAGA populist movement and get revenge on the liberals. Whatever. And the esoteric message is democracy is fake. The elite.
Let's just like
no matter what, and we will rule it without any democracy or any of this fakeness.
Yeah, just pillage the hogs and destroy
the
mountain people, and like just.
We're trying it again. In the state of California, we have our own experiment on this, which is the proposition system, which is an overlay on top of the legislature, and it, anybody who looks at it for 2 seconds concludes it's been a complete disaster. It's just a catastrophe, and it's caused enormous damage to the state.
Yes.
And so basically, the presumption that we are in a democracy is just sort of by definition fake. Now,
that's
good news for the U.S. It turns out the founders understood this, and so of course they didn't give us a direct democracy; they gave us a representative democracy, right? And so they built the oligarchy into the system in the form of Congress and the executive branch and the judicial branch.
Yeah.
But
see, that's what's funny is these people are capable of like saying true things, but they're wrong regardless, because he says, they gave us a representative democracy instead of a direct democracy, so therefore it's still an oligarchy, which means it's good, which is like, first of all, direct democracy is not really a thing. Has there ever truly, like, what is direct democracy? Like, everyone votes on everything? That's not viable, and that's not a viable system. So pretty much every democracy ends up being a representative democracy of some kind. The critique that the U.S. is not a democracy is that it fails on the standards of representative democracy. But
which I think he, Andreessen seemed to be hinting at as well, with references to the executive and the judiciary.
Yeah.
Kind of, oligarchic checks on democracy. But I think his next step would be like, technology is really the ultimate, like, mediator of, social conflict.
Yep.
If we have all this data, then we can create this kind of like hyper surveilled like society, where we can, hold everybody to account and things like that.
Yeah.
And I guess one thing, and we should talk about Palantir and kind of the more concrete nitty gritty, but yeah, it's incredible how this program, the ideology is really just the justification of their class rule. And what they want is to destroy any fetters on their rule and any fetters on capital. And they want to block any democratic attempt to create a more egalitarian society. Right. And it's just gross. Like, of course, they elect themselves those who have the best interests of society in mind. Like, they really don't. And it's just so infuriating that we don't have the infrastructure to like make very clear that like this MAGA movement is just the external and superficial shell of a very hateful, elitist group that wants to fuck over everyone except for them.
Yep. Absolutely.
And of course, the Democrats are worthless and like just beyond worthless, fucking like just ancient, just mummies, just walking around, just doing nothing. It's just God.
Yeah, or the new ones kind of play right into this idea where I think they have a lot in common with Andreessen and things like the idea of like the need to deregulate and make space for innovation. And I think maybe before the sort of right turn of like the tech capitalists, they would argue, and they did argue that these are the people who are Elon Musk is kind of the vision for like a techno utopian kind of liberal society. But clearly this has shown like these people actually have quite a different vision. I want to read a quote from Larry Ellison of Oracle. We haven't talked as much about Larry Ellison at Oracle, but he's also kind of a part of this. They have like acres and acres of data centers, Oracle does, around the globe. And his vision of the future of policing is basically, he says, the police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And it's unimpeachable. If there's a problem, AI will report the problem and report it to the appropriate person, whether it's the sheriff or the chief or whomever we need to take control of the situation. If there's something going on, a drone goes out there way faster than a police car, the new generation of autonomous drones. We need to unify all the national data, put it into a database where it's easily consumable by the AI model, and then ask whatever question you like. That's the missing link. So, AI will solve the problems of police brutality because, they'll be watching, and they'll solve the problem of crime because they'll be watching. And
Philip K. Dick couldn't have been more prescient, man.
Motherfucker, there's literal videos of these absolute idiots just killing black people. There are videos, like, what the fuck? Like, that's clearly not the issues. We can just like Facebook Live this shit.
And we got to say, Zionism plays a big role in this because Israel is kind of like where they're, it's a test lab for a lot of this stuff. Like this AI stuff, it's being used for their genocide. It's being used to determine the targets in their genocide, and they're testing it out there, and they're going to bring it back here to use on people here for the police state.
Yeah, I mean, this is like not a new phenomenon. I was actually watching a documentary last night on the invasion of Panama by the U.S. in I think the late 80s, early 90s, 1989. And, the allegations there that the U.S. used this invasion as a testing ground for new military technology, like kind of laser technology and, other kinds of technology. So not totally new, but it does seem like there is a renewed scale, and maybe the source of this innovation is sort of moving in a new direction towards the Silicon Valley. Alex Karp, the leader of Palantir, I think was like talking about wanting to create like a new Manhattan Project, which if folks don't know the Manhattan Project, that was the investment in national R&D that kind of led to the development of the atomic bomb. So it seems like maybe a new Manhattan project for AI, is something that people are really pushing for in Silicon Valley. What does that mean? Probably more surveillance, more tools of state repression, and really like Palantir and all these other like stupid kind of not Silicon Valley, like Lord of the Rings style companies, Andrea, Mithril, Narya, Realm Alliance, Palantir, like these companies are going to be kind of the future of surveillance and repression that are kind of scaled up through this new Manhattan project.
Yeah, it's worth going over. It's worth going over Palantir, right? Maybe I can kick off, and then we're going to transition from this insanity to Yemen. But so Palantir is a data collection agency, or it's a data analytics collection agency. It's a data agency that was founded by Peter Thiel. I'm sure some others as well, some other ghouls. And despite like the libertarian pretensions of Peter Thiel, it became big because it had a near monopoly on work with the CIA. So the first thing is like this very clearly dovetails into this idea that how they're going to try to create the soft core is by fragmenting the state from within, by privatizing the state, and Palantir is an example of that. But yeah, basically Peter Thiel, besides PayPal, starts to gain his fortune by having a near monopoly on data work for the CIA. And I don't know if people want to just like kind of continue on like how Palantir is a thing, but yeah, I mean, I just find it supremely ironic. It's like, I'm a libertarian. Like, I made all my wealth working for 3-letter agencies. It's like, that's wow.
Well, I think the way they kind of balance it is say, well, we're taking the work of the 3-letter agencies and we're putting it in the hands of private individuals who will serve their country more efficiently.
Of course, this chud is from South Africa or whatever. So yeah, it's just crazy, dude. Like,
but yeah, I think cryptocurrency and the whole nature of stable coins and that project is an interesting thing to look into, and how that plays into all of this. I think that might be a potential.
Honestly, we might need to do a part 3. We might need to do.
Yeah, no, I think I think this live stream might end up being partly a series on this topic.
Yeah, I think we're gonna need to do a
deep dive into crypto. We will be insane at the end of this.
Yeah.
No, I've been reading about crypto for a while because I think it is like pretty important actually for where things are going, and it's becoming a part of the mainstream financial institutions, despite its pretensions.
Yeah, it's rapidly institutionalized.
Yeah, and I think it is, and it's like I remember when it was just a meme back in the day, but now it's an important part of the world, and so I think there's something to that. I think it's something we should be covering. But
I just feel like Charlie Day
and
with the Pepio Silva. That's me
connecting the dots.
I'm going nuts. Like,
well,
I mean, it feels crazy and like unrealistic, but it is like literally happening today. Like the Prospera is a real thing in Honduras. Like Ukraine is piloting this kind of everything app, funded by, like CIA, like, it's all happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I really, we're talking about the whole like sovereign city thing or whatever. I think they're going to try to do something like that in Gaza. I actually think that's kind of the plan.
Yeah.
I think that they want to genocide the Palestinians and build their stupid fucking bullshit there where they can do human experiments on people and have their child sex orgies or whatever the fuck these Nietzschean vitalist tech warlords get up to. It really is just unfathomable evil that we're coming up against.
Yeah, and again, the democratic solution is basically, the same policies, but hope that the sort of, moral valence is different.
Yeah, they just want to go back to when all these tech guys were hanging out with Obama,
There's no going
No, there is
back.
no going
Maybe we'll
back.
talk more about it when we get.
I don't know. I think it was William S. Burroughs who said sometimes a paranoid is just someone who knows what's going on. And it's like with this stuff, you almost can't be too paranoid. Like there really is this techno-fascist agenda that
Is it really paranoia if they're actually out to get you?
Yeah, no, and
doing the thing.
So they are out to get Yemen right now, and it looks like actually I was looking at my X feed earlier today, and I was seeing some of the Yemeni accounts claim that they scored a hit on the command center of a U.S. aircraft carrier. I don't know how true that is, but we have a guest from Cosmonaut Magazine coming on to join us to discuss what's going on in Yemen. We have Eric. And hey, Eric, how's it going? Can you hear us, folk? All right. Eric, you there? Okay.
Can you see if your mic works?
Yeah, this is the problem with doing this stuff live, is tech problems are also live.
Hello? There we go.
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, it does. It never freaking accepts my USB Realtek. That's probably why. Sorry about that. Also, sorry for not having a camera, so you just disturbed my Twitter PFP. But all right,
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. So speaking of unfathomable evil, that's just been what's happening in Yemen, probably for like over 30 years at this point. Yeah. So what in particular we want to talk about in Yemen, because it's a very broad subject.
Yeah,
you can go as early as you want.
Right. So I guess what happened today?
Today, in terms of like
or recently, has anything important happened in like the last 24 hours that you know of, at least?
Yeah, so today the Yemeni High Command basically said that they managed to take out at least like the command center of a U.S. aircraft carrier. I don't know if they killed anyone, but they're claiming that they took out like a significant part of the USS Harry Truman. That's not been confirmed by the American Navy yet, but there's been no active like kind of denials so far. So I guess we might just we're probably going to get a reveal from the Department of Defense, or maybe not, knowing how like they run their comms now. I think they're really just kind of don't want anyone thinking about this war at all, especially like their base and then like people who would be sympathetic to it. So they might not just say anything, but I wouldn't be that surprising considering the fact they have access to hypersonic missiles, and nothing that the American military has can counter hypersonic missiles. So
where did they get the hypersonic missiles from?
Well, there's conflicting reports on that. There's some that say they got it directly from the Iranians, like others that say that they possibly got it from like Chinese technology that got smuggled in from either Iran or the DPRK. But they have access to them and they're able to build them using the pretty sophisticated military infrastructure that they inherited from the previous Yemeni state.
Right. So they've got sophisticated military infrastructure, and it seems like I've also heard they have pretty sophisticated intelligence infrastructure.
Yeah, I don't know about internationally. They do seem to have a bunch of connections in the Red Sea as well as like within the AOR, but like domestically speaking, they have a very robust intelligence network. It's why like you're not even really getting the third people in like the third rung of leadership getting hit by like strikes that happen in Sana'a, because like the locations of almost everyone in the upper leadership cast of like the current Yemeni government is basically like hidden from almost like even like civil servants. So like foreigners are definitely not able to like determine anything about them for the most part. It's part of the biggest reasons why like there hasn't been like more direct kind of like air war interventions akin to like bombing Libya or Syria, is because of like just this such a limited degree of information on Yemen.
Right.
So I guess, and I don't know if others agree, but it might be useful to speak about, the Yemeni involvement in the, counteracting the war or the genocide in Gaza, and from that point on, I guess we can get to now.
Okay, yeah. So essentially, they started kind of like armed solidarity to Gaza, invoking like the right to protect doctrine, which is typically the UN doctrine the United States typically used to justify its military interventions from like the end of the Cold War until like fairly recently. And despite what a lot of like people might say about the Ansar Allah movement or like the legitimate government of Yemen, they didn't really need to do this just for like credibility reasons. They had mostly like won the war, and there was more or less like a ceasefire since like COVID started. So like doing this actually puts a lot of like actual targets on their head. They're mostly doing it because they do legitimately believe in stopping the genocide, and they are the country which has probably done the most to try and like actually like take the fight to Israel. Hezbollah kind of got involved months later, and then capitulated pretty quickly. And Iran just kind of like sent it like less missiles than Saddam sent during the Gulf War to Israel. And then the Iraqi militias sent almost nothing. So like during the entirety of like the height of the genocide until like the January ceasefire, they were basically like seizing ships, they were blowing up ships, they were striking targets within Israel, they were striking American military targets after America initiated Operation Prosperity Guardian, Operation Amazon Protector, as people on the internet usually call it. But like, yeah, since they're mostly utilizing like their wide variety of like pretty sophisticated long range weaponry for this, because obviously they don't really have like a ground force that they could really land even in like the tip of the Red Sea. That would be a bit more difficult for them. So they can really only intervene remotely at the moment, but they do have the technological basis to like do that pretty effectively.
So what are like the logistics of them like? Because we've seen all these like badass like videos of them like going in helicopters and like storming the. So I guess two things, like logistically, how are they able to pull this blockade, and then secondly, had there been any casualties besides like Amazon Prime packages?
As far as I'm aware, they typically tell ships to like kind of like just the crew to flee if they're gonna blow them up. And every ship they seize, they don't really kill anyone. In terms of like possible casualties, I'm not sure. They might have killed some people in Israel, but I don't really have any hard stats on anything. But like the media doesn't seem to be talking about any casualties, so I'm assuming there's probably none other than just like tanker ships.
Yeah, the casualties are economic.
Yeah, it's damaging the world market, but it's not like they're doing any kind of like killings of like even civilians in this, or if they are civilians, they're probably Israelis.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like moral justification goes, like I think it's very hard to argue that the blog, what they're doing, isn't morally justified.
Oh no doubt. I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
Yeah,
It's just-
in terms of like the ability to do this, it's mostly just because they inherited like the mechanisms of the previous like Yemeni state, and they're quite good at mobilizing people more effectively than the unified Yemen government has been able to, or even like the precursor Yemeni Arab Republic. Yemenis haven't been this mobilized probably since like and that was in South Yemen, which they don't really control much of now. During like the Marxist Republic period, they were able to do quite effective like mass mobilizations, which they do now, and that allows them to have like access to like hundreds of thousands of troops, as well as like a vast array of like like resources that they can use to like fund their war economy.
Yeah.
I
I would like to talk more about kind of what led to the rise of Ansar Allah and the kind of prehistory.
Yeah, sure.
But before that, I would like to bring up the leaks, because obviously I think we can all agree that the way that like it's been discussed in the media is pretty atrocious. Like people are more like disgusted by like the fact that they were planning the war on signal than they are disgusted by the war itself, which is, and this is obviously is the fact that this is a continuation of Biden's war. This is not a new war. I don't know if Trump's strikes have been more intense and more, I don't know if he's going harder than Biden did. I honestly doubt it. But so the fact is that like the criticisms around this have entirely been around the fact that they haven't been careful enough, I guess, in planning it, because I'm sure everyone is aware that Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, got added to the signal chat where Hegseth and Vance and all the people were planning this out, and there was a big media scandal about it. But I guess the question is, was there actually anything in the leaks that was particularly interesting or revealing that we didn't already know? And maybe
I don't think so. I mean, the thing with the leaks is they seem to be like the least controversial parts of whatever was being discussed. Because a lot of people talked about like these are like groypers. Wouldn't they be using chud, like chud language, like slurs? There didn't seem to be like any tangible like intelligence like leaks from the leaks. It was mostly just kind of them peacefully saying like, oh, maybe we don't want to strike Yemen. Should we strike Yemen? I think we should. Here's the reason why we should. And then just them using like peace, like basically like, yeah, like it does seem like it was basically like Goldberg just leaked this in a way that would not like jeopardize anyone in the Defense Department, because that's just what his job has been for like the past 20 years. It's just been a stenographer for them, for the State Department and like the Department of Defense.
Yeah, he was an IDF prison guard.
Yeah, and he went to Israel to join that. He didn't even grow up in Israel. He specifically wanted to serve in the IDF as like a way to find himself after college.
Dude, like, like, instead of doing the whole like let me go to Tibet thing, he's like, let me go brutalize Palestinians in jail.
Well, he said he wanted to feel like a strong Jew, one that wouldn't die in the Holocaust.
Oh my god, just
it's disgusting.
Yeah. I mean, that's just
it makes me suspect that the leak was on purpose. This might be like, this is obviously purely speculation. I don't have like any real proof of this, but like the fact that like there wasn't any actual like intelligence that got leaked, but at the same time, like it kind of shows like Vance being like, oh, maybe this is a bad idea,
Yeah, anti-war Vance, who said
like it kind of come off as a
foreign policy.
I literally
the
think
American leader.
maybe the leak itself was like a psyop to like kind of like make people think that Vance is still kind of anti-war, and that, you know, even if you have like concerns about this Yemen strike, Vance is still our guy on the inside who's, you know, gonna, you know, keep things under control.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a possibility, but like, who would that be for? Like, who is still
Yeah.
going to be convinced by that? Who wouldn't just like, you know,
Yeah.
wouldn't need anything to keep convincing them of that? Like, I feel like the whole thing with like, you know, like Trump too is like, if you still, you know, if you're still bought into it, you know, nothing's gonna fucking convince you of that. And
Right.
if you had like any reservations, the moment he got reinaugurated, then like, yeah, you're probably not fucking with him anymore.
Also, it seems to me like the whole anti-interventionism of these like this right-wing movement is overblown. It's not that they're anti-intervention, it's that they don't want Americans to die, but slaughtering Arabs is fine. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
You hit them with missiles, that's who cares.
Well, I think the anti-interventionism is solely focused on like arming Ukraine, I think, versus anything else, because they don't really criticize anything about Israel. Like Israel was receiving way more aid than Ukraine was the past like 15 months. And they didn't really say anything about that, but they were very upset about Ukraine getting like, you know, like $38 billion. I do think it's just purely a partisan thing. Like, just right-wing media like hype up the Ukraine war as this very specific bad thing, evil thing that America has helped prolonging. And you know, people are just going to think about that. You know, these are people who've like never really conceived of Arabs as human, as Jamil was saying. So like, what's going on in Gaza is just par for the course. So we're not going to talk about that. And you actually are anti-American if you say that's a bad thing. Which is indistinguishable from like the Democrats, functionally.
You know, I do see some MAGA people who are like kind of going down the like paleocon anti-Semite route, kind of, or the JQ route, and they're, you know, like Nick Fuentes is kind of like that. But I don't think those people are going to be won back to MAGA through like a JD Vance league, you know.
Yeah, no, and a lot of them already left the project beforehand, before he
Yeah.
got back into office. So it does just seem like they lost a significant portion of like their old far right coalition that they just cannot win back.
Because
And,
like, there is a
have to do
segment
that.
of the American right that is like genuinely isolationist. I mean, you know, they have terrible politics in a lot of other ways, but there is, you know, maybe this is also just related to my background, like growing up in Florida, where like anti-war was often like just libertarians. Like, you know, I did come across like genuinely like anti-war isolationist paleocon types. So I don't know how much that is even relevant anymore, but
What is the like ideological justification that I mean, it's kind of a tangent, but that like libertarians give to being anti-intervention? Because what if there's like a market for intervention? Then like,
I think it's a very specific type of libertarian that was like really prominent during the Bush administration and kind of like died out during Obama, which is like, you're just a classical liberal. You basically think that like the state is a very evil institution, so the market is less bad than that, and that's why you're libertarian, not really because you like fetishize private property.
yeah. Well, I think it was also just the fact that like Ron Paul was like one of the only politicians who like
Was
seemed to actually be like genuinely anti-war. But if you actually look deeper into it, it's obvious that, you know.
well,
Yeah.
I'm guessing that like their philosophical argument is probably like something like, well, one, it violates the harm axiom.
Yeah, non-aggression principle.
Non-aggression principle, and then maybe secondly that foreign intervention oversteps the powers of the state, of an ideal state. Who cares? Let's not get into it.
Yeah. So before we kind of get into a little bit of the prehistory, there was recently I guess they do these 1 million man marches for Palestine and Yemen.
Yeah, they do that pretty consistently.
Yeah, they do that consistent. And I guess you know, they had a Our fellow countryman Jackson Hinkle was speaking.
Yeah, they introduced him as an opposition activist.
An opposition, yeah, we had an opposition activist from our own country who actually spoke at one of their rallies for the first time, which is fairly interesting.
Yeah, I think they just kind of get like a list of people, and then they're just like, oh, this is good. Just like let's bring that person. You also like had like Claire Daly there, and I think
Yeah, from the Irish Parliament.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I mean, like it does just seem like they just invite anyone who's like willing to go. I don't really think that many people would even have access to find a way into Sana, as it is like a very blockaded country. Like you have to take a very weird route to get there. So like it does kind of make sense that like Hinkle and then like a specific type of like Irish politician would be the only like Westerners to show up there.
I gotta say, like watching his speeches was pretty hilarious. Like.
I could see George Galloway, like
Jackson Hinkle is basically like the American George Galloway, except he is now like he's going for the like opposition leader gets exiled from the tyrannical government so he can return one day to lead the revolution.
Bro, it's like Carlos the Jackal, but with Hinkle.
Yeah.
He wakes up in like a little house, and he's like got like whiskey next to him, and then he's like, oh, another day, like
another day of the armed struggle for Palestine. I guess I got to go hijack another airplane today.
It's time to go steal a case of Amazon Prime packages.
Is this for Saddam, or is this for is this one for Putin? Or is this one for, and I guess, people are claim that because Jackson Hinkle has a connection with Tulsi Gabbard, who's now the director of national intelligence. People are claiming that Hinkle might have been there as a CIA or military intelligence asset to spy on Yemen. Other people said, well, do you really think that like Ansar Allah / the Houthis don't have like the intelligence capacities to like do a background check on this guy?
Also, what the hell would he like be able to get? The dude doesn't speak Arabic or like
I'm assuming he would meet with one of the leaders and they would just target like his location from that and then
blow up Hinkle and the guy.
Yeah, well, of course, yes.
Yeah. Well, Hinkle hasn't been blown up yet, which is kind of like like how has he not been blown up?
How do they let him back into the country?
Well, they're not going to let him back.
He
lives in Russia now.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, he's been living in Russia since like September, I think, and he has a personal driver in Moscow. So I should give you an idea of who's backing him.
Yeah, he's got some friends in the regime for sure.
Yeah. See, everyone calls like Jackson Hinkle CIA. And like, I think if he was like a U.S. intelligence asset, I would think he was like aligned with like the pro-Russian part of the deep state, like the Tulsi Gabbard faction, and he's just kind of like trying to arrange like a détente with Russia on behalf of like the Tulsi Gabbard faction. That might be like that's. I'm not saying I believe this. That would be like the only like explanation for. But I think that he's just a Russian asset who works for a Russian oligarch.
Let's not spend another minute on Jason.
Yeah, but anyway, so that was going viral, and I think it is interesting though that like Ansar Allah do seem like interested in like reaching out to Americans and like propagandizing them.
They do predominantly pull a political strategy. They're actually like. They do like invoke a lot of like very like Western concepts a lot for a group that's supposedly like like reactionary Islamists, like even more so than like other like ALR nations. They have like a stronger defense of secularism, I think, even before coming to power. They were basically arguing why if you're like actually a true Muslim, you would want a secular republic versus a one that invokes the law of God to function.
But I did read though that like in a lot of the areas, like when they were kind of winning the civil war, they were like implementing Islamic law.
Yeah, but like from a different, it would basically be like more so like conservative kind of interpretation. So that like they had to justify it in secular law. I think that's their argument. If you can't justify it in secular law, then like you can't enforce this.
Okay.
You can't just make a Quranic argument for it. Yeah, and obviously they're gonna have reactionary tendencies because they're like, you know, their initial basis was like as a tribal movement. They're obviously going to have like very regressive attitudes towards like women and like a bunch of other stuff. But like they do seem to be like a very modernizing force besides that fact. But like obviously you have to accept like significant like kind of reactionary, like socially conservative tendencies. I guess like reactionary might not be the
right. And I think this can kind of get us into the prehistory here, because like if you are going to kind of critique, you know, these reactionary tendencies, you have to keep in mind that like, you know, they came into being fighting against you know, Saudi backed Salafis, right?
Yes, the Islah party specifically. So the what is termed the Houthi movement, Ansar Allah, actually has its formations in like the very early 1990s after the basically the reunification of Yemen. A couple years afterwards, essentially there was a war between the North and the South because of kind of like differing like command structures. And basically the former dictator of Yemen, Ali Saleh, basically uses it as an excuse to basically massacre the remains of the YSP using the Islah party, which is a kind of like a Salafi kind of Wahhabist party that like came of being from Yemeni guest workers kind of going into like Saudi Arabia and replacing their kind of like previous kind of tribal traditional Islam with like a kind of Wahhabist interpretation of it. And essentially the Zaidi Shias, or I guess just call them Zaidis, they're technically not Shias, in like northern Yemen, the northern Yemen mountains, kind of felt threatened by this. You know, they felt like they were going extinct. So they kind of started a movement to kind of defend their own interests called the Hawk Party, the I believe Truth or Justice Party.
So basically, if you have like this Saudi imported Wahhabism, and then you have a more indigenous, you know, Muslim faith,
yeah, you have
threatened by this Saudi imported Wahhabism.
Yeah, more or less. And also you have like a growing kind of movement. The Hawk Party kind of you know, like starts breaking down, like Yemen becomes more authoritarian, like the parliament becomes more rubber stamped, like people stop like even kind of like trying to contest elections, especially after the Civil War, because, you know, like the opposition party just got like slaughtered in mass. Like, why would you try to do anything about that? So specifically, Hussein al-Houthi went to like the mountainsides and basically kind of started a mass you know, Zaidi revivalist youth movement called the Believing Youth that was supposed to serve as like kind of like a non-violent civil society that was supposed to like organize for like you know, like reforms to kind of like stop the violence of the state. And this starts facing like and a very large amount of violent repression from both the Islah party and like Yemeni security services. And then 9/11 happens. And basically Saleh is able to use his connections to both Saudi Arabia and America to basically like get military and economic aid from America to use to basically kind of like wipe out his remaining like opposition. So, you know, they're not just like targeting Al-Qaeda, which is a growing problem in like Yemen at that point, but they're also like targeting like the Believing Youth, essentially. And I think this is specifically where the term Houthi comes from, because I think like they were just like selling this in intelligence papers, like, oh, we're targeting Houthis movement. Who's you know, who's this guy? Well, he's like a anti-Western preacher, so you know, he's dangerous to your interests. So it's actually good that I'm bombing them. So after like a couple years of bombing, the Believing Youth movement renames themselves God's Partisans and basically take up military struggle. And because Yemen is spending so much time fighting Al-Qaeda as well, they kind of get pincered by both Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula and the Ansar Allah. And eventually Ansar Allah just keeps getting significant victories. And around like 2009, 2010, they basically are able to secure a ceasefire from Yemeni central government. And shortly after that, the Yemeni spring happens within the larger Arab Spring, and Saleh's government basically collapses. However, the GCC kind of convenes a meeting and says this is actually very dangerous. We don't want Yemen falling out of our hands. You had, the UAE was very concerned about like basically most opposition groups to Saleh, who was, a secular dictator, and like secular in the loosest definition of the word dictator. So like you had three political Islamist forces that were kind of like most likely to take over Yemen, that being like the Isla Party, AQAP, Al Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula under their local form. I think, what was it? The Ansar al-Sharia, I think. Yeah. And Ansar Allah. So essentially they kind of like force this election that would where the only candidate is Saleh's former vice president, Mansour Hadi. So yeah, Mansour Hadi, of course, is elected with 100% because there's no other person to vote for. But he convenes this thing called the National Dialogue Council, which is basically this institution that has no powers, but like every opposition party gets to like come up and kind of speak about a significant problem that Yemen is having. And this is supposed to precede like parliamentary elections in like 2014 or 2015. And this goes on for a year. There's a lot of things coming out here. Basically, like Ansar Allah develops a lot of connections to a lot of civil society groups and progressive organizations, the remain of the Yemeni Socialist Party, the remains of the National Democratic Front, which was a Marxist guerrilla group in northern Yemen. And essentially tries to pitch a new idea for a kind of like new, unified, independent, democratic Yemen that would be secular, but like still obviously, it's led by like very devout kind of like Muslims who are believe in like Islamist politics to some extent. But it would be like de jure secular. The climax of this, basically, a bunch of people from the National Dialogue Council start like getting disappeared, and then like kind of shooting starts from Ansar Allah, as well as like other forces that are oppositional to Hadi. Essentially, like Ansar Allah is able to like rally its forces and then just kind of take Sana'a. Most of the Yemeni army kind of just defects to them. And they institute like a new revolutionary government, which is not just made up of Ansar Allah, but also like all these civil society groups in like Sana'a. So it is both a kind of like mass tribal movement, but is also a movement of a lot of like urban proletarianized and like professional people from like
and it seems like
urban Yemen.
It seems like a lot of the kind of remains of the Yemen Democratic Republic are kind of going with this movement.
Yes. And then basically after like this is this new republic is proclaimed, essentially what's called the Yemeni Civil War starts, which was more or less like the actual civil war portion of that was won within 2 months, basically. Like the Yemeni army and Ansar Allah's kind of like paramilitary groups, they basically move into Aden to kind of take over like this rump state that was declared by Hadi in southern Yemen in the city of Aden. Basically, there's like very little fighting. The army just kind of collapses and they take the city. And then Hadi flees to Saudi Arabia. And basically, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and a couple other countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council basically mount an invasion from the north and also the south. They reinvade through Aden. So essentially, the Yemeni civil war has been going on since like 2015. Is not really a civil war. It's a foreign invasion. It's like a foreign invasion by the Gulf Cooperation Council for regime change purposes. There's more or less like no organic opposition to the government in Sana'a. There's a lot of paid like mercenaries from like tribes,
Yeah.
but there's not really like any like actual organic opposition other than like, you know, like all these people who basically just take a cut of money from like some Gulf country and kind of just sit in a hotel as like these kind of mouthpieces for
Which is why it's so
intervention.
infuriating. Which is why it's so infuriating when like the U.S. media is like the Houthis. It's like, you mean the fucking government of Yemen?
Yeah, no, the more or less legitimate government of Yemen.
It's like, do we like the Republicans when they're talking about the U.S.? Just like idiotic. You know?
Yeah, no, it's like a very kind of
Listen to this Arabic word. It's frightening. Like,
yeah, no, it's like this very
Pirates. There's pirates in Yemen, and they're attacking
Yeah.
everyone who comes nearby. They're just attacking everyone for no reason.
Yeah, it's like a very racialized conception of these people as like basically like essentially like these people who are like living in caves with like they have control over like most of the industrialized section of the country. Like the handful of areas they don't control are like they have there's like no industry or infrastructure there barring Aden, and Aden like is really only like not in their control because like the UAE view it as a very strategic port, and like just parked a bunch of like foreign mercenaries there who have like, you know, like modern equipment.
Like, from what I understand, like the war on Yemen was basically a genocide. In terms of
Yeah, they enforced a blockade and it kind of killed like 500,000 people recorded, possibly more.
yeah.
It was like one of the largest cholera epidemics in like recent history started because of like the medical portion of that blockade.
And it was entirely U.S. backed.
Yes, it was entirely U.S. backed. There was an attempt during the Biden administration to actually kind of stop it. That was like coordinated with like Bernie Sanders. I think basically was like saying like, oh yeah, we just can't sell weapons to like the GCC until they stop doing this. And then Biden basically said like, well, we're gonna stop selling them offensive weapons, which basically meant nothing. But this continues for a couple years until like 2019 when Yemen's like missile and drone systems were actually like upgraded enough that they could like strike far enough into Saudi Arabia, and they started basically like striking a bunch of infrastructure and
I remember
like
that.
F1 races and said like, you know, like this is just like round one. If you want this to continue, we're going to be striking like, you know, your mansions, your like water filtration systems. You're not going to be able to get any money. You're not going to be able to export anything out of your country. Do you really want to keep doing this? And they basically just kind of like gave up after that point. The forces they controlled in like Yemen just kind of gave up. Saudi Arabia, I think, like just completely got disinvolved from the conflict. They don't have any troops in Yemen anymore, but the UAE wants this to continue because they feel very ideologically threatened by Ansar Allah, as well as like a kind of like independent, like pan-Arab kind of like Yemeni politics is very frightening to these countries in the region.
Yeah, no, if I was the average like Arab like leader who's like, you know, whistling the United States and Israel, I'd be terrified by, you know, the rising Ansar Allah sentiment, because it seems to be a revival of the kind of revolutionary pan-Arabism that these people tried to snuff out.
Yeah, no, it's not even, you know, like it's an actual pan-Arab movement. It's not just words. It's not like the late Ba'ath regimes where they kind of just like said things. Like they're actively backing this up with like, you know, like military, like, you know, like military hardware. So like, you know, all these quisling governments that have like 10 times the amount of like weapons and like, you know, like funding that they do, like why can't they do anything? Why can't Egypt get involved? Why can't Jordan do
Yeah,
this?
because it has like people have to understand that like Yemen is the poorest of the Arab nations, I would say. I mean, definitely in the Middle East, at least.
Yeah, I think Somalia, if you count that as an Arab nation, might be like a little bit. Actually, no, I don't even think so because I think like Somaliland actually has a decent economy. So yeah, Yemen is the poorest.
It is the poorest. I've never, I mean, I've never heard Somalia be included in the Arab world.
But it's part of the Arab League. That's why I mentioned it.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So
Yep.
well, I think.
Well, I think I have one question,
Okay, yeah.
which is, do you think that these current strikes from Trump are going to be different and any more successful from a U.S. perspective than Biden's?
I mean, no, they do seem to be
And-
both the same thing. They're both like very untargeted kind of strikes at like civilian infrastructure within like Yemen. I mean that happened under Biden. That's happening now. I think it's a lot of the same people in CENTCOM like planning this, and I don't really think they have that many ideas. They initially thought like they could just cower. You know, they thought this would be like bombing Iraq in the 90s. They thought they could just kind of like really kind of cowardly do that. America's not really used to fighting a country like this. Probably hasn't fought any like nation that had these capabilities since like the late Vietnam War, when like the DRV actually had like a very competent air force at that point. So like they really don't know what to do. They're kind of just picking targets to pick targets because that's what command is telling them to do. I don't really think anyone like who's engaged in this operation thinks it's going to work.
Yeah, the U.S. military has gone just so used to bullying basically peasant armies that anyone who has like any degree of technological sophistication is just like an impossible foe to actually defeat. It really like, yeah, no, I mean, it's a snowflake military.
You know, it's an amazing story. You know, you just have this group of rebels in the countryside taking on a foreign-backed movement. They eventually are able to strike, their own
The Great
enemy in their
Satan.
own country. Backed by the U.S., backed by the Great Satan, they're able to, build up their own military infrastructure where they can do drone attacks and missile attacks on oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, and then they are able to liberate a good chunk of their country, and then they start attacking Israel and doing the blockade, and the U.S. can't stop them even still. And they're the poorest country in the Middle East. It's amazing. It's one of the things that gives me hope today. I'm not gonna lie. It is absolutely, it's just absolutely
the
inspirational.
Yemen people are a brave and principled people, and the whole world should honestly be applauding their efforts.
Yep. I mean, I'm sure we've all chanted "Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around" at Palestine marches. But I'm glad you came on, Eric, to talk about this.
Yeah.
I think you gave a very good, quick overview of Yemen and some good background on who Ansar Allah are. I think a lot of people only really know them from the blockade and the cool videos. They don't really know any of the kind of backstory, back history, and the indigenous Yemeni
Yeah, we hope
context.
to have you on for some more stuff. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about the Middle East. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks
Glad
for
to have
having
you
me
on.
on.
Thank you, comrade.
All right. And we're almost at 2 hours now. Do we want to go over this abomination, this abundance of abomination that started to read?
So can we?
I don't have that much to say on it, honestly.
Well,
so I guess it's
one thing I wanted to do is I sent you remember that like video of like the Trump or the Musk song? Can we please just listen to that together?
Yeah,
then
hold
we'll
on.
do,
Put
and
it
then we'll
in
do
the
something more
chat. I'll
serious.
put it
But
up.
this song made me just I almost like pissed myself. It's too funny. Let's definitely
let me get a
listen.
link
Yo,
to it.
Carlos, have you heard this song?
What song?
It's an Elon Musk song written by just like some hog that like loves Elon. But it's so funny, dude. You'll love it. I have to think. I have to
I need a
thank
link,
Anthony
though.
Fantano for showing me this. 1 second. I mean, not that he knows me, but just like on his channel. Wait, let me find.
You should
Shout
get
out to
Anthony Fantano
Fantano.
to come on
Yeah,
our
we need to
stream.
Get him on the Cosmocast.
Yeah, Fantano, come on. I know you're not listening. Or
Maybe we
no,
can. Who knows? Maybe we can. Probably not. Yeah, he is.
Fantano's a
Yeah,
lefty.
We might be too
You know,
bonkers though, but let's see.
I don't know.
Okay, wait. I'm on the wrong channel. We're gonna find this thing.
No, I think
I think we
Oh
just-
yeah,
I
I
think
found it. I
Jack
found
found
it.
it.
I'll post it to.
Hold on.
Oh
I
my
can
god, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's listen to this Abomination. Yeah.
I'll play it on
There's
Twitter.
also a YouTube one that I sent.
I'm always gonna call.
Hopefully. Yes.
Is it this one?
Yes. This shit is.
All right. Prepare
This
to
is so
cringe.
awesome.
Prepare
I'm
for
gonna turn off
upcoming cringe.
my microphone.
Prepare to make comedy legal.
He gave us cars that drive so fast, made rockets built to blast. Oh, thank you, Elon Musk.
Like he built the thing himself.
He took over Twitter's reign. He saved free speech for all, eliminating woke pain.
Is he crying there?
SpaceX flies, Tesla self-drive, Starlink beams with laser dreams. He's got a master plan for our lives.
He does have a master plan for our
Let's
lives. That is
occupy
true.
Mars. Let's occupy Mars. And making kids to keep mankind alive.
Doing that too. He is making kids.
Neuralink is
Right.
on the way. Boring
You're gonna put a
tunnels
chip in your brain.
save the day. Oh, thank you, Elon Musk. Fighting fights for freedom's sake. Politics, he's not afraid. He won't just sit and watch. SpaceX flies, Tesla self-drive, Starlink beams with laser dreams. He's got a master plan for our lives. One more kid, one more brand, launching rockets with just one hand. Optimus, Cybercap 2, what can't this man do? It's taxes, fraud, some solid memes. Corruption won't stay. And Doge saving USA. So here's to you, our tech tycoon.
No, I think
Saving
I agree
Earth
with
and
that.
Mars real
I think
soon.
Elon
We thank you, Elon Musk. One more kid, one more brand, launching rockets with just one hand. Optimus, Cybercap 2, what can this man do? Oh, thank you, Elon Musk.
Okay, yeah, that's
You cannot convince me that was not a parody
yeah. I
or
mean,
satire of some kind.
yeah. Sometimes reality is the best parody. I mean,
You know, like when you find like there was this one song by this band called Fun with a. I just found out that it was a real song that a band did. It wasn't just like a parody of like horrible millennial music. It's like funny when that always happens when you find out that like some song that like you thought was like making fun of like terrible music.
I mean, they
was.
managed to work in his kids and like his, that weird kid thing that he has.
Yeah,
It's
no,
like,
the-
oh,
27
it's-
neglected children, yeah, with like disgruntled baby mamas.
Yeah, it's like all of the things that are
No,
terrible
and the
about
thing
him. They
that
think
my
are
favorite
awesome.
line by far is occupying Mars. There's nothing there. You're not occupying it. They're not taking it from anyone. Like, oh my god. Also, why do people want to live on Mars, bro? That shit sucks. Like, there's a reason there's no fucking
Yeah.
life there. Oh my god.
There is this game called Planet Crafter that I've been playing with my brothers, where you like terraform a planet. It's fun to do in a video game, but yeah, I don't imagine it being very fun in real
More like
life.
it's more like Aliens, like James Cameron's Aliens. You know, that's what it's like. You know, maybe we should do. I don't know. Should we do
Yeah.
a little bit of abundance now, Donald? You can give us your report on.
Yeah, I kind of want to, tie it into YIMBYism in general. Maybe we can get a guest on, talk about this. Because there's a lot to say about this kind of YIMBY movement and its prominence in certain left liberal circles. But I guess tell you a little bit about the Abundance book. I didn't finish it, but I did start reading it out of curiosity because I like to read the ruling class has to say. And it begins with this kind of it begins with this like kind of vision of the future where like they kind of appeal to fully automated luxury communism, actually, like they actually cite it, but it begins with like this vision of like, let me get my e-reader actually to this is.
And Donald, maybe while you're doing that, I
Yes,
could maybe
it's very-
describe like very sort of high level what the abundance sort of theory is.
Yeah, go for it. Kind of introduce what this is for
So-
people who aren't.
So
exposed
Abundance
yet.
is this new book by Derek Thompson of The Atlantic and Ezra Klein, kind of arch liberal. I'm actually not even sure where he is nowadays. But the book is basically like a collection of their articles, but it's really an attempt to sort of create a new model for saving the Democratic Party and liberal democracy more broadly. But the basic like policies that they are putting forward are deregulation in order to build more things, get more stuff done, build more houses, build more infrastructure, hence kind of the abundance, but also deregulation to really unleash innovation, research and innovation. I think it's Adam Tooze describes kind of this philosophy a little bit as like output legitimacy as compared to say like a more, rights-based legitimacy, labor rights, civil rights, or even like a sort of redistributive, like bringing more things to people. They say, the abundance people say that stuff where we think that's kind of in the past. We need to focus just on building things and getting things, the basic sort of policies, and we can get into, who's the coalition, what do they get right, what do they get wrong, what do they miss. But Donald, maybe you can read the this little excerpt here of their utopian.
Yeah, so it's my first impression before reading this was that they're just trying to appeal to like tech people and like win back like tech people back from MAGA, which I think is trying to win like a section of like kind of the leftover, at least from the kind of they're trying to kind of bring in this utopian vision. And they say you open your eyes at dawn and turn in the cool bed sheets. A few feet above your head, affixed to the top of the roof, a layer of solar panels blinks in the morning sun. Their power mixes with electricity pulled from several clean energy sources. Towering wind turbines to the east, small nuclear plants to the north, deep geothermal wells to the south. 40 years ago, your parents cooled their bedrooms with jewels dredged out of coal mines and oil pits. They mined rocks and burned them, coating their lungs and their byproducts. They encased our world in a chemical heat trap. Today, that seems barbaric. You live in a cocoon of energy so clean it barely leaves a carbon trace, and so cheap you can scarcely find it on your monthly bill. The year is 2025. You walk to the kitchen to turn on the sink. Water from the ocean pours out of the faucet. It's fresh and clear, piped from a desalination plant. These facilities use microbial membranes to squeeze out the ocean salt. Today they pulled out more than half of the country's fresh used water. Previously overtaxed rivers as the Colorado has surged back now that we don't rely on them to irrigate our farms and fill our coffee mugs. Phoenix and Las Vegas, previously parched cities, are erupting in green foliage. You open the refrigerator. In the fruit and vegetable drawer are apples, tomatoes, and an eggplant, shipped from the nearest farm mere miles away. These crops don't grow horizontally across fields. They grow vertically, on tiered shelves inside a tall greenhouse. Banks of LED lights deliver the photons the plants need in precisely timed increments. These skyscraper farms spare countless acres for forests and plants. As for chickens and beef, much of it comes from cellular meat factories, which grow animal cells to make chicken breasts and ribeye steaks. No live animals needed, which means no confinement and slaughter. And, so yeah, we got lab. Then it says, out of the window and across the street, an autonomous drone is dropping off the latest shipment of star pills. Several years ago, daily medications that reduced overeating, cured addiction, slowed cellular. Yeah, I don't know. It's like some
star pills, bro.
I guess they like reduce aging. Slowed cellular aging were considered miracle drugs for the rich, especially when we discovered that key molecules were best synthesized in the zero gravity conditions of space. But these days, automated factories thrum in low orbit. Cheap rocketry conveys the medicine down to Earth, where it saved millions of lives and billions of healthy years. And so yeah, it's just more of this.
So I've interfaced with drones and eggplants, but like, where are the other humans? Like, what the fuck?
Right, that's like what kind of strikes me about this. It's not that any of this technology is like necessarily bad or like these are necessarily even bad things, but it's like there's no humans. Right? They're not describing anything about how like society is different in any way whatsoever, and how we as humans like treat each other differently or act differently, or like it's basically the same world we have today, except it's all this amazing technology that just so happens fix every problem that we're worried about today, or that progressive liberal types are worried about today. So what is keeping this world from coming into being, asks Mr. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson? Well, he talks a lot about housing, and I think this is like one of the places where a lot of liberals today are coming into this line of thinking is around housing and like the whole YIMBY ideology. And he goes into like homelessness, and he says, all right, let's look at like what causes homelessness. Like some conservatives like look at California's homeless problem and they blame it on Democrat policies of like over licentiousness towards drug use and the cops not being hard enough and progressive. He kind of dismisses all of those, rightfully so. And he says, real problem is that housing prices keep going up, and that is causing homelessness to go up. That doesn't sound disagreeable, right? Like, I mean, I think we can all agree that housing is too expensive, and that it makes sense that if housing goes up, it becomes more expensive, homeless people are going to increase, right? So, and so obviously his solution to this is, not rent control or, some kind of socialist housing program, but it's the classic liberal kind of YIMBY, yes in my backyard approach. And so he goes into like the kind of the politics of home ownership, and he kind of points out how basically homeowners want to artificially inflate the values of their assets, which means preventing the construction of cheap housing that will reduce the value of their housing. And so yeah, obviously, like we can say that homeowner politics and the American middle class is the kind of not in my backyard politics that he's describing, which is often very racialized. White middle class homeowners trying to like prevent like housing from being built around their neighborhood so poor black people can't live near them, stuff like that. And so he talks about that, but the problem is basically the solution is not to make rent illegal, as Chapo suggests, and as any normal socialist suggests in response to this and getting rid of the whole home ownership system, getting rid of the landlord class, getting rid of his whole rentier system, but basically to get rid of regulations on housing development. And he cites Matt Yglesias, of course, as the example, and points out how like these regulations keep people from like building cheap, shitty housing. But wouldn't you rather have cheap, shitty housing instead of being homeless? And so, of course, there's never the possibility that like, well, if actually the government could just build like good housing for everyone, and we don't actually have to like settle for like the shittiest possible solution, right? But so he basically kind of uses housing as an example of where regulation prevents abundance from causing from being from flourishing into existence, and therefore causing prices to go up. And so
and and I think you were telling us earlier, like when we were all speaking, you were like, it's kind of like just this attempt to like elevate YIMBYism
into into a world,
like a spiritual worldview,
yeah,
and then like kind of like paint it or give it the patina of like futurism. But of course, like there's only so much like lipstick you can put on a hog. It's just empty. So it's just like this weird exercise of like taking a list of various YIMBY shit and trying to just like dress it up into a religion. It's like really weird.
Well, and really what it is like just the free market ideology. They don't really say that, but like, that's kind of the end result of deregulation, absent, more state investment, which they're not really arguing for. That's kind of one of the criticisms that Adam Tooze makes of this book, is that like he doesn't phrase it as a criticism, but he says basically like the book does not really address political economy, in any meaningful way. It is just kind of this what he calls a morality tale, around like the importance of growth and building things. And
it is very much a morality tale, because he kind of talks about Nader's Raiders, like the kind of the generation of like kind of left liberal legal activism that is kind of personified by the figure of Ralph Nader, as part of because in the 1970s you have all these legal interest groups that start suing companies for environmental regulations. You have the rise of legal environmentalism, basically. And he basically says that he says, okay, obviously, these legal environmentalists, they did reduce emissions and they did make some wins and they did do some good things. You can't deny that. But at the same time, like, they've created all these regulations. They've created these the groups, is what all these Democrat wonks like to talk about. They created all these like groups that we now have, if we want to build something, we have to negotiate with. And and he uses the example of like high-speed rail in California, and how much political difficulty has gone into building that. But he doesn't really go in. He doesn't, like you were saying, he doesn't go into the political economy and look into the class interests that make like building these kind of projects hard. Like, he kind of just sees it as like, well, there's just all these public interest groups that have been able to use the government to create all these regulations that at one point might have been necessary and were a good cause, but now have made it more difficult to build stuff that we know is good for the environment.
I mean, the thing is like, it's just like, bro, that just like flies in the face of past and contemporary history, which is like, go to like, I mean, I'm not trying to elevate like the Nordic countries into being utopia, but if you like look at their system of like the railway system, it's fucking robust. And I can guarantee you that their regulatory state is more stringent than in the US.
Right.
Also, like look at fucking China, dude. Like, the state has an enormous role, and they're laying down tens of thousands of lives.
But he brings up China as like a positive example. Like, look, they're able to build down all this high-speed rail. Why? Because they don't have all these environmental activist groups who are able to use the state to kind of create all these negotiations that companies have to go through in order to build things.
I mean, they're not wrong.
That's not even true about China. Like, there is a history of environmental activism.
It's not so much the environmentalism.
Violent environmental protest in China against developments.
No, what were you saying, Carlos?
I mean, the obvious point to make here is it's not the environmentalist groups. It's the fact that the Communist Party directs the economy for a large part of it. So no one's going to resist. It just seems that just seems like a complete misrepresentation of what's actually happening.
Right. I mean,
maybe it is that. I mean, okay, I don't know enough about like Chinese like construction law or whatever, but maybe they do. I don't know. I
mean, it's a private public system. I mean, they guarantee a lot of funding for construction companies, and they attach a lot of conditions to it. It's way more regulated than it is here. But it's not like it's the government single-handedly directing all government.
Oh yeah, and it's not like the government doesn't have interest groups within it that they have to negotiate between when they do these projects, right?
Yeah. But I mean, like, I don't know, even if you take their argument at face value, you accept, okay, you know, regulations are getting in the way of building more things. Maybe there's some truth to that. Then the question becomes, okay, well then, like, who is doing the regulation, or who is doing the building? You know, what is the model that you actually want to emulate? And, you know, for Klein and Thompson, who kind of posit this as like a way to save liberal democracy, like the actual alternatives that we can see in society today, like China as the ultimate output legitimator, or like, you know, Musk and Doge, and kind of like, you know, the right-wing implementation of like deregulation and the whole kind of tech fascist sort of dystopia that we just discussed. Like, those are probably not sort of they're not liberal democracies, right? Like, this is not really a prescription to save liberal democracy in any meaningful way, because democracy in many ways is kind of especially in the Andreessen style direct democracy, seems to kind of be the hamper.
Right, exactly. And you know, the thing is like the whole idea that it's like organizations causing like negotiations and all these veto points, you know, it does very much rhyme with the techno-optimist manifesto stuff we were just looking at, where he names like the enemy, and the enemy is basically like anything that gets in the way of like basically building what we need to build now, according to, you know, investors. And I just don't see how this is that different, except he's like putting like a green. It's like, well, it's except this case, it's like we're gonna like get rid of regulations so we can build like green energy and green stuff instead. You know, it's like
they're. I mean, here, listen. The thing is that despite their pretensions, the right wing people we were talking about, and Klein and whatever this guy's name is, despite their pretensions, it's all just plain old liberalism in the strict economic sense. And there has always been a tension and liberalism between its economic aspects and its political aspects.
Yeah.
And the sense being that economically they want the free reign of capital, and politically they wanted a check on the aristocracy. But that meant at a certain point forming an alliance with more Republican forces. The moment those Republican forces, those democratic forces, become something more than a point of contest against aristocracy, as soon as they start to have their own aspirations for rule, then the political liberal becomes more strictly an economic liberal, someone who will do anything in order to assure the conditions of capitalist accumulation. And so that's what these assholes are, whether they're on the right or they're Klein. They want to eliminate fetters on what they see as the development, the free development of capital. And they want to give it a sort of spiritual profundity. What do? They paint it with the patina of futurism. That literally is what unifies these two camps. They're just petty utopians with futurist pretensions that are practicing neoliberalism. That's it. There's nothing really distinguishing them.
Yeah, they also have some of the same financial backers, you know, like the Kochs, the Yimbys. I would imagine there are many that fall into kind of both of these camps. So there are even some of the same people in both camps. I'd be interested what you all think about this comment from Brendan from YouTube. The bigger problem that all this is dancing around is the financialization of the Western economy and creating an economy based in the friction of society versus actual productive activity. I think that's a great, great.
Because I think one thing Klein says is like, well, we've had a lot of innovation in the tech sector, but we haven't had innovation in like infrastructure sectors. is one thing he kind of brings up, and I wonder how that relates to this issue of financialization of the economy, because he doesn't really critique the financialization. When he brings up China, he doesn't talk about how their economic system, which kind of puts finance capital under like a political control, that is part of what allows them to do this. There's no real dealing with like the question of financialization and all of this. At least as far as I've read. I still need to read more of the book, so we'll be talking about this more, I think. But
Well, there's no dealing with political economy, period. Like, it is sort of a a fanciful narrative that they've basically crafted around, just implement deregulation, and then, abundance will kind of emerge. It doesn't deal with the underlying economic structure of our system. Doesn't deal with, I don't know. The thing that always gets me is, this homeowner versus developer divide that the YIMBY set up. Like, homeowner interests are pretty reactionary, but like, painting developers as like the good guys in the story, like, just doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't know, like, if I'm a real estate developer, like, I'm always trying to get the highest and best use for my like development, and like, I don't know when that would ever really align with like housing for low income people, especially like
I mean, I think Comrade Cliff said it best, but the YIMBY stuff never made sense to me, because I've been living in Florida for most of my life, and they keep building more housing, but housing just keeps getting more expensive, which is absolutely what it's like here in Florida. Like, they are always building housing around here, but prices have only gone up. So, it's just very frustrating too, because like when you argue with people about this stuff, they'll be like, "Oh, so why don't you want to build? Why are you so against building more housing? Why don't you want to build more housing? Like, we need more housing." I'm not against building more housing. Like, I'm not against building things. Like, that's not the issue here. The issue isn't that like we need to build things and like build infrastructure and improve infrastructure. Like, that's not the issue. The issue is that you want to put this entirely in the hands of private interests and just like let them have their way, essentially, and hope that market forces will magically like make it all work.
I think YIMBYs take it even further than that. Like, what I hear from YIMBYs is precisely the argument that it doesn't matter the quality or the kind of housing you build. As long as they're building, it will, supply and demand will decrease prices. Never mind the fact that, for example, New York, half the housing they're building is luxury housing, and no one's going to buy. That has no effect whatsoever on the demand structure of housing.
Yeah, exactly. And they act like we're so irrational for like not getting on board with these politics. Like, oh, you guys just don't want to spend your time doing the hard, boring work of studying the technical details on policy. You just want to, scream about revolution and abolishing rent and smashing the state. You don't want to actually like do the real work of building things and make people's lives better. It's just like,
I mean, and to that we can respond that, I mean, look at like Red Vienna. They had incredibly successful episodes of building public housing that were not just like, just like brutalist shit of just like piles of concrete, but were like wonderful and beautiful spaces with like amazing courtyards, like connected to grocery stores and like playgrounds.
There are various examples of cooperative housing in New York City, for example.
Yeah, that are really nice. So it's like, you don't have to make shit up. There are historical antecedents that were wildly successful. The only reason they got eaten up is not because they weren't successful from the point of view of fulfilling social need, but because they didn't make money for the right people. That's it. Like, it's annoying. I mean, I remember one time, like, I went to this like one like artist residency in Paris, and it was not in a fancy neighborhood at all. And I was like, and then there was like a residency where like a bunch of like international artists came, and like they had like an apartment space, and I'm like, holy shit, this is nice as fuck. And people were like, yeah, we don't pay anything for it. Like, it's part of the residency. I'm like, oh, like, really? This is like nicer than any apartment I paid like egregious sums for. So there are existing examples even today. It's really Americans are so cucked by the market. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous how in the responses, like when I like said like why don't we, like there was this Armando Malusky guy. He's kind of like a Twitter liberal celeb. He was like the leader of Yimbies for Harris. Epic fail there, but he's like one of the big Yimby abundance shills. And he was like, the Chapo guys, you know, they don't want to, like, they just responded to this by saying, why don't we make rent illegal? And so I said, why don't we make rent illegal? And then all these Yimbys start flooding my replies, being like, but then people will never be able to live anywhere because they won't be able to afford buying a house. It's like they can't comprehend the idea that maybe the government could build a bunch of housing for people and provide housing for people.
And there are successful examples in the past.
Yes.
And even today, and shut the fuck up. Like we're
so, prove it, I go.
Yeah,
like,
bro. Like, I don't want to be 87 and like get my first place I can live and feel like it's my home. You know, god damn, bro.
Yeah, and it's just like it's funny because like these liberals like Klein, they're so aware of like how bad the housing system is. You know, they're aware of that it's. People pay to live in New York City. You don't live in New York City to get paid. You live there. You pay to live there. At this point, like you're spending like 50% of your paycheck on rent. You know, it's clearly a problem, and they're able to recognize this and they're able to see that it's causing social dysfunction in broad society. But the only solution that they can think of is basically just giving more class power to the same class of people that created this mess.
Yeah, and like the neonatalist shit of like have babies, but it's like where am I gonna?
Yeah,
where are they gonna live?
Where and how are you gonna pay for them?
Yeah, like
or diminishing quality of living.
Yeah, I mean, come on, dude. Like these people have no compassion. Honestly, I wonder how much Ezra Klein makes. Let's look that up.
I bet it's a lot.
What's the over under?
Yeah, it's funny. Elon Musk was actually praising some of Ezra Klein's stuff. Let me see if I can find it.
Isn't he like a New York Times columnist or something?
Is he with the Times now? I think you're right.
Bro, the New York Times is just so dumb.
The last refuge of the PMC.
Yeah, bro, so dumb.
I think
did I show you guys like their movie review of The Zone of Interest?
I saw that. It was.
I mean, it was profoundly just like anti-intellectual.
Well, the word I want to use is probably shouldn't use it.
Yeah, it was an art film. It's like that's supposed to be a criticism that they made art. Like,
yeah, that's pretty embarrassing, even for New York Times.
A bunch of Philistines, bro. Wait. Yeah, I don't know how much he makes. It's not like rappers you can look up their net worth, you know.
Well, listen, we know he's part of the liberal commentariat elite, basically.
Yo, he def make at least. He probably is like a millionaire, like easy.
I mean, they're right to identify a problem in the Democratic Party and their like inability to really deliver on anything. I just think that they don't really have a solution.
It doesn't help that they're either senile or in hospice. You know what I mean?
Like, what can they actually deliver on though? That's the issue. They're not gonna seat on anything, seemingly.
They can deliver on being the liveliest person in the hospice.
They can deliver on almost entirely cultural, and even then, like,
bro, even then, I mean, Chuck Schumer's wasting his time. You know, in literally going on tour for bitch about anti-Semitism. It's unbelievable, man. Like, come on, like, get over yourself. Like, God, that's what he spends his time doing. Like,
oh yeah, and they also, I don't know, like, they're into policies. They're not so into politics. I don't know, like, you know,
they're not even into policies though. Like,
I know.
Yeah. Like they have like some kind of vague policy ideas, but
you guys remember like their policies are like the like Kamala Harris, like what, like you remember that one thing, like the Pell Grants for if you like had a business 2 years, but
that's
like,
right,
are under 22, but then also
like if you graduated and you started a business within 2 years and you have 50K of debt and all this,
and your zip code ends with the 6, and it's just like all these like fucking all these attachments. You're like, who ends up getting this? Like,
yeah. It's like, who does this speak to? Like, who does who does the YIMBY sort of like program speak to? Like, it's basically saying like if you're upset about your rents being too high, like, you know, it's, you know, like rely on the developers to help out. Like, these people are going to save you. Like, your landlord is going to save you. Like, who the fuck wants to like get behind that? Like, that's the thing with people, like even on the left, people who cite like Red Vienna. That's the point Isaac has made a lot. Like, even people, cite Red Vienna, forget that like the reason that happens because there was like a large, popular mobilization in support of like social democracy.
Oh yeah. In Austrian social democracy, it was significantly more left wing than social democracy in other countries at that point was.
Yeah. Well, anyways, maybe we should start to wrap it up.
Yeah. Hold on. I wanted to show this clip that Elon Musk retweeted, where Ezra Klein's talking to Jon Stewart about Build Back Better.
Oh,
and it's interesting how
I don't think Jamil's gonna make it.
I
At the end of the series.
We suffered a lot today.
But I just thought it was interesting that Elon was like, "This is good stuff."
Did like
the lies
push back
in some ways? The fail.
Well,
They
actually,
wanted. They
we'll
wanted.
see.
They didn't want to just build it, Ezra. They wanted it back better.
Maybe. Oh, wow, man, that's there's something about throwing me back to that moment that hurts at this moment, right? Like the optimism, it was a simpler time.
It was a simpler time. Yeah, but you make the point in the book, which I think is really interesting, that moment of optimism actually crystallized in some ways the failure.
Yes.
And you make it very stark in terms of
So much optimism.
For instance, the Chargers, which I think is a great example.
So liberals passed $7.5 billion for a nationwide network of electric vehicle chargers. We also get $42 billion, and this is a big thing they tout a lot, to do rural broadband. There's a lot of parts of this country that are not hooked up to broadband. And in both cases, and these were passed early in the administration, particularly the rural broadband money, by the end of the administration, by the election, by the time I'm fact-checking the book, they just have not happened. And you look into why, and we did look into why. And what you get are these incredibly baroque internal processes. I'll focus on rural broadband for a minute here, because that one was a good idea.
Still a good idea.
And they liked it. Like, that was the one they went around when they talked about the infrastructure bill. They were like, roads and rural broadband, right? And if you look into what happened, they created, not in the bill, but this is really important. We have this whole little Schoolhouse Rock song about like how a bill becomes a law, and it's like sitting on the steps of the
I'm not going to
Congress.
ask you to sing it, Ezra.
I've been practicing. I have been practicing. We don't have the song about how the law becomes reality, how the law becomes a series of implementation rules, then a notice of funding opportunity, then there's a comment period, then there's a challenge period for the comments, then there's a series of court cases.
Right.
And so for rural broadband, for instance, what you end up having is a 14-stage process. Like, there's a period where the Commerce Department needs to draw up a map of which parts of the country don't have the right amount of broadband. And then there's a challenge period on the map, and da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da. And 56 states and jurisdictions try to apply for this money. And again, this passes at the end of 2021. They have time. By the end of 2024, 3 have gotten to the end of the process. They were trying.
Three of these 56.
Yes.
End of the process, meaning they've actioned it, they've built it, or they've
No, of course not. I didn't mean they built it, John. Sorry, I confused you.
Oh, dear
They just
God.
got to the point where, in theory, they could get the money to build it.
They had been approved for the money.
Okay. So what we have here, I think, is like, an example of them not really looking at the political economy of this thing, because if you look at the American constitutional system and like how the government is set up and everything, you can see why something like the big infrastructural project like Build Back Better would become completely kind of just even if it starts out as like this great idea by the Democrats, by the time it actually gets implemented, it's going to be so watered down to be basically meaningless. And there's all kinds of institutional reasons why this happens that can't simply just be put to there's just too many regulations. Because the thing is, like, he doesn't really name like what the regulations are a problem are. He just says that there's just too much loopholes that we have to go through. You know, he doesn't actually explain like
He really
what
just
the
describes an
political
arduous process. He just says, "Oh, it's just an arduous process."
Right. And it is. I mean, I think like obviously if you want to do something like that, there is going to be like some level of arduous process and planning it out and making sure that it can happen, right? But I think
it's like I don't know. McNair makes this argument like kind of about like the nanny state, kind of the trap that like, you know, liberals and social democrats can fall into of like, you know, kind of defending like this idea of the nanny state, this kind of bureaucracy that people don't like because it is convoluted and hard to administer, et cetera, et cetera. And it does seem like, you know, Klein is making an attempt to, you know, mount a critique of you know, the kind of failures of the bureaucracy, which I think there are lots of failures. I don't think they're wrong on that point. But it just, the question becomes, okay, well then what is your alternative to you know, accomplishing these kinds of goals? And if your you know, if your idea is just, you know, let the market do it, end up with the kind of like you want. And I think on some level, like, you know, to I think you do need administrative state capacity, like to fulfill these kinds of functions. And maybe there needs to be like a transformation. I mean, there definitely needs to be a transformation to the, you know, the way that this sort of state operates. But I don't think the solution is just to kind of, you know, wave away the state. It you know, yeah, Jamil, as you said, it just kind of plays into classical liberalism, plays into the right. It's not really a workable solution to that problem, or it really turns into a right-wing solution to the problem.
Well, yeah, it seems like the solution they want is like depoliticize it as much as possible and then leave as much of it as up to the market as possible.
Yeah, it's really not that. It's not that deep, in other words.
It's about depoliticizing these things is really what I think, and then that's what it has in common with the like neo reaction, mold bug stuff as well, I think.
Yeah, and I like what CrimeBot was saying, which is like stringency. Like they don't make a distinction between the stringency of regulation and its coherence. Like, and I think that is actually a very good way to frame the problem, right? You think about just like the quality of civil service in the U.S. and it's really poor, and you look at like the relative quality in places like China and it's much higher. You know what I'm saying? And that obviously ties into like writing like coherent fucking policy and law.
Right. And I think, you know, there's not really like a critique of how private interests are a problem in these things.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's not that you have civil society groups that are contesting these development plans. And I think society should contest these things, and development should be contested by the public so that it serves their needs, right? Like in a socialist system, it's not that we would want the state to just be able to build whatever it wants, wherever it wants, without any kind of contestation. Like, and it seems like Klein kind of wants that, as long as like it's green or whatever, and it fits like what he thinks should be done. Like he basically thinks that the state should be able to...
It's a general problem of social coordination, right?
Right.
Like, you know, I have like kind of a mini example in my own environment. Like, you know, so at UMD, like they built a lab, and this lab is like a very expensive lab. And the state wanted to start building a metro like right next to UMD. And the university had to be like, well, that's fine. We're cool with that. But the magnetism of the metro system will completely disrupt the operations of these labs. And it's not like they're saying don't build it, but it's like you have to coordinate these kinds of problems, right? And it becomes a very complex thing to do. That's just like one small example. I mean, in the grand scheme, that lab is not so important, but it's an example of the kind of coordination you need to go through when you build things. I was actually thinking at some point we should have our comrade Sullivan on, because he's a civil engineer and he can kind of take us through the nuts and bolts of like of like just kind of like how houses are built and like all the problems that exist today. And it would be interesting to kind of hear from him. Like,
yeah, no, that's a good idea. That's a good idea.
He you know, he precisely has many criticisms that are like, yeah, the shit is inefficient. We could rewrite it to be much more, you know, much better. But it would be good to have him on to talk about like the nuts and bolts of this shit, as opposed to just like hand waving like fucking Ezra Klein. Be like, there's regulation. Like, okay, well, explain what you mean. You know?
Yeah. And like I listen, like there's grains of truth in the Ezra Klein book. I'm not going to completely dismiss everything there because he is coming from a more sensible and rational place than someone like Mark Andreessen. But in the end, the ideology really isn't that different.
I mean, yeah. I mean, well, we do have to at least give it to Ezra Klein that he's not like genocidal and insane like Yarvin.
Well, I mean, when it comes to Gaza, he doesn't seem to care that much. Yeah. I don't know. Actually, I haven't really paid attention to his commentary on Gaza, but I think
silent.
I do remember him having a really embarrassing comment where he thought that there was like a bridge connecting Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Let's end it there, my comrades.
Well, I think that's a good place to close off for today.
Thank you guys, and join us again Sunday, 2 o'clock.
Yeah, Sunday we'll be doing it again.
I guess we'll continue our part.
I think we'll be moving on to part 3. I think maybe diving a little bit into the cryptocurrency stuff.
Yeah, and more into the Palantir surveillance state stuff.
Yeah, if anybody has sources they want us to look into, send them our way.
Yep, and we'll probably do some more on the Middle East, and then we'll take recommendations as to what people would like us.
Oh yeah. Please reach out to us if you have ideas, recommendations,
and as always, tell your friends, please.
Yeah, spread the word. Try to get the Twitch numbers up because I noticed Twitch you don't have a lot of viewers, and so we'll do what we can to break it.
We don't have enough gamers.
Yeah,
we got to get the gamers. Maybe I could just come on here and game.
At some point, I think we will have to do something.
Yeah,
we'll have to game.
People will see how bad I am at gaming, but that's fine.
Yeah. I think Comrade Carlos is probably the best gamer here.
Don't put the spotlight on me like that,
dog. I think you're the best. But like, what's it called? Play Tarkov, which should be the most. Which would be most
if you ever wanted to simulate what it's like in Ukraine.
Yeah,
I was thinking Stalker. Once I get my PC upgraded enough and I can run Stalker too, that'd be
pretty sick, dude. Yeah, I'd like that. I don't have a good PC though, so
Yeah,
it just looked like 8 pixels just moving around, trading spots. Okay, y'all. Well,
all right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
All right, take it easy, everybody.
Peace.
Just out.
I see. How do you feel about this action today with all your things out in the street?
I hope that the communists blow you people up, man. You dig? That's where I am.